Please take your seat, delegates. We will reconvene in less than a minute. Good afternoon. I hope you had the opportunity to have a good lunch or to enjoy some of the side events already programmed. Before continue with our considerations in item 3, we will return to item 2 on organizational matters, election of officers. This morning, when we consider item 2, I encourage members of the Bureau to continue consultations with the respective regional groups over lunch, so they will be ready with their nominations by then. I would like to return to this item now, and I open the floor for the outstanding nomination of the Latin America and Caribbean states. So I invite, I think it was St. Lucia, or who will take the floor? What is Sao Tome? But I believe it's St. Lucia.
Floor 138.
138. Microphone is open. Please proceed, St. Lucia.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm very happy to report that Latin America and the Caribbean states have nominated Ms. Aria St. Louis from Grenada to be the Substat Bureau, on the Substat Bureau. Aria St. Louis is currently the environmental specialist for the government of Grenada and head of the environmental division in the Ministry of Climate Resilience, the Environment and Renewable Energy. She serves as the technical focal point to the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is CBD, the Biosafety Protocol, UNFCCC Adaptation Matters, and the Basel Convention. Her research and interests include assessment of the impact of climate change on island biodiversity, measuring biodiversity response to using ecosystem-based adaptation approaches to promote resilience. Her experience as a biologist spans marine, freshwater, and terrestrial ecosystems, including multidisciplinary research on commercially important fish species, endangered species, and monitoring indicator species. She has worked in the Department of Fisheries and Aquatic Science at the University of Florida, as well as been attached to the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, DNA Profiling and Forensic Center. Chair, as you are aware, Grenada is not a party to the Nagoya Protocol, but as there are no items on the agenda for the Nagoya Protocol being considered at this meeting, I understood that we have a bit more time to identify a substitute, and we can come back to you with
Microphone to San Lucia, please. I think he was using the Sao Tome microphone.
Chair, would you like me to start all over?
No, just to finish. The interruption was just 3 seconds ago.
Okay. So, Chair, as you are aware, Grenada is not a party to the Nagoya Protocol. But as there are no item on the agenda for the Nagoya Protocol being considered at this meeting, I understood that we have a bit more time to identify a substitute, and we will do so before the end of this week. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, San Lucia, for the good news. So, seems we have complete names for different members in all regions. So, if there are no objections, may I take it that the subsidiary body wishes to elect the following nominees by acclamation. For the African states, the nominated candidate is Mr. Kenneth Yusef from Namibia. For the Asia-Pacific states, the nominated candidate is Mr. Yahidul Kabir from Bangladesh. For the Eastern European states, the nominated candidate is Professor Taulan Bino of Albania. For the Latin American and Caribbean states, the nominated candidate is Ms. Area San Luis of Grenada, in the understanding that the substitute for the Nagoya Protocol will be identified and elected later. For the Western European and other states, the nominated candidate is Mr. Scott Wilson of Canada, to be substituted by Mr. Niklaus Wagner of Switzerland for the Cartagena and Nagoya protocols. I see no objections, so it's so decided. The new Bureau members are elected, so I extend my congratulations to them, and I invite them to attend the Bureau meetings of SBSTA as observers to get familiar with the group and the works. With this, we now complete agenda item 2, so we go back to agenda item 3. As is regarding 3A, as you might remember, the last intervention from one of the observers from TNC made a specific proposal of language. So in order to respect our procedures, I will ask if there's any party raising your hand supporting the inclusion of language by the NGO, so we can consider on the debates. I see a hand in EU, and I thought it was also Kenya. And yeah, so there are at least 3 parties supporting, so this will be considered. With this, we close our deliberations on agenda item 3A, and now we move to 3B on mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. As you know, in decision 15.6, the Conference of the Parties adopted an enhanced mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. In the same decision, it decided to conduct a global review of collective progress in the implementation of the framework, including the means of implementation based on national reports and, as appropriate, other sources of information. The Conference of the Parties requests that the subsidiary body on implementation develop the concrete procedures for this global review and request the subsidiary body, the SBSTA, advise at this 25 meeting to provide advice to the subsidiary body on implementation on relevant scientific, technical, and technological inputs that should inform the global review. I have discussed this agenda item with the chair of the subsidiary body of implementation, and that body will be developing the concrete procedures for the global review of collective progress in the implementation of the framework at its next meeting, which will be after SBSTTA-25. While in line with the mandate from COP, SBSTTA-25 will be providing advice on the scientific, technical, and technological aspects. Thus, the advice provided under this agenda item will be provided to SBI for its consideration when it develops its recommendation. Now, I would like to invite the Secretariat to introduce the document from item 3B. Secretariat, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For this agenda item, the Secretariat has prepared document CBD-Substa/25/3, Scientific, Technical, and Technological Inputs that should inform the global review of collective progress in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This document provides a summary of possible elements of the global review of collective progress, which is being developed in accordance with Decision 15-6 of the Conference of the Parties. In that decision, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to compile views from parties on the concrete procedures for the global review, to support the subsidiary body on implementation in the development of these procedures, and to assist with this process, the Secretariat prepared a draft document that set out possible procedures for the global review and invited parties to submit views on the possible procedures contained in the document, as well as any other procedures for global review. 12 parties submitted views. The concrete procedures for global review will be considered by SBI. However, draft procedures are set out in document CBD-Substa/25/3 to provide the full context for your discussion on the scientific, technical, and technological inputs for that review process. This document proposes content and key questions, including scientific, technical, and technological inputs for a global report on collective progress towards the implementation of the framework, including terms of reference for a scientific and technical advisory group for the preparation of a global report. As mentioned by the Chair, the document includes draft recommendations with elements to be provided to the subsidiary body on implementation for its consideration in developing the concrete procedures for global review. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretariat. So I will invite you to be as concise as possible, as we've been doing in the morning, or even better. So please focus on essential points and submit the full text of your intervention to the Secretariat. I open the floor for comments on this document. I see Norway.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The global review is a key element of the enhanced mechanism for planning, monitoring, and review adopted at COP15. The global review will be the main tool to help us keep track of the collective implementation of the global framework. It will examine the effects that action taken so far have resulted in and how this measures up to the progress needed to achieve the global framework. The global review process should also identify gaps and enable parties to work together to agree on steps necessary to ramp up action and support. SBI is mandated to develop the modalities of the global review. That will consist of several elements. We welcome inputs from Substa on the global review in line with their mandate to provide scientific and technical advice to the SBI. Referring to the document under this agenda item, we have the following comments that will be supported by text proposals submitted in writing. We support the global report on implementation as one element of the global review process. The main focus and major content of the global report should be to assess parties' collective progress towards the framework, including towards each of the goals and targets based on information from national reports. We would also welcome the inclusion of a high-level summary of the most recent and relevant scientific and technical information on the state of and trends in biodiversity as part of the global report. The global report should be prepared under the guidance of SBI. Substa should provide significant input to the high-level summary on the state and trends in biodiversity. We support the establishment of a scientific and technical advisory group under SBSTA that will facilitate SBSTA's input to the global implementation report. We see the need to make adjustments to the terms of reference to make clear that this group will be providing advice to SBSTA and that SBSTA in its. We also wonder if the group should be called an informal technical advisory group, similar to the group set up under the DSI workstream under negotiations of the global framework. This is an established format. The global review process is a new element adopted at COP15. The global report on implementation is a direct response to this process. We therefore would not support calling the report a GBO. The global report on implementation is a specific report tailored to the global review. It should provide us with a clear picture on how we are collectively doing on implementation and a short summary on the global status on biodiversity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Narwe. And I'm sorry that parties has 3 minutes, but currently it's set to 2 minutes. I hope the technician can fix this, so don't feel bad if after 2 minutes it's close your mic. Now we'll give the floor to Mexico, followed by Japan and Spain.
Gracias, señor presidente. México considera pertinente que el informe global tenga una estructura que contenga las aportaciones técnicas provenientes de los informes nacionales, las tendencias de los indicadores, los resultados de las evaluaciones de IPBES, así como la información contenida en las ediciones previas de la perspectiva mundial sobre diversidad biológica. Ante el reto de contar con un informe tan ambicioso y completo en un lapso muy acortado, consideramos pertinente la creación del Grupo de Asesoramiento Científico y Técnico para el desarrollo del informe global del marco mundial. Asimismo, también creemos que la coordinación con el órgano subsidiario de asesoramiento científico y técnico y tecnológico debe ser cercana y con una fuerte comunicación entre ambos para evitar duplicidad de trabajos. Con relación al documento, tenemos algunas observaciones que enviaremos por escrito. Gracias, señor presidente.
Gracias, México, y gracias por ser breve. Doy la palabra a Japón, seguido de España y Brasil.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As it is the first time for CBD to conduct the global review, Japan considers it would be important that the most effective modality should be determined in consideration of our experience of GBOs, of which the modality was adopted at COP2. It would be also important to ensure the synergies with the IPBES processes, in particular, the second global assessment. Therefore, Japan considers it would be quite important to establish relevant mechanism to coordinate with the IPBES processes without any duplications in relation to, but not limited to, the establishment of the advisory body. While we are aware that some of the matters should be discussed at SBI rather than at this meeting. It is also suggested to learn from other relevant MEA processes, such as the global stock taking, which is ongoing process at UNFCCC for more effective implementation. As the global review is a review of collective progress in the implementation of the GBF, Japan considers that primary work on the global review should be conducted based on the national reports. Regarding the membership of the advisory body, we were not able to identify the term of the membership. We consider it should be important to set clear term as well as other necessary guidance on the membership of the committee. This may not be needless to be mentioned. This agenda item is closely related to the discussion at SBI, and Japan considers it would be efficient for SBSTA to focus to scientific and technical consideration, which will be support successful discussion at SBI. On another note, The Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on Liability and Redress was adopted at the 5th meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol, COP5, held in Aichi, Nagoya, Japan, on 15th October 2010. Today marks the 13th anniversary of its adoption. The supplementary protocol aims to conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity by providing international rules and procedures in the field of liability and redress related to living modified organisms. Although such supreme objective of the legal instrument, the current number of the parties is still limited, and it is only 54. As one of the parties which has their names of the cities found in the name of the protocol, Japan would like to remind and encourage all parties for further cooperation, the implementation of the Nagoya Kuala Lumpur Supplementary Protocol on the occasion of its anniversary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Japan, and thank you for the reminder of the anniversary. Now, doy la palabra a España, seguido de Brasil y Camerún.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. España reitera la visión y la información aportada en respuesta a la notificación 2023-69, en la que se recalcaba que la revisión global tiene que ser considerada como un proceso compuesto de 4 fases. 1. Recopilación de información. 2. Diálogo técnico. 3. Fase política. Y 4. Fase de respuesta. En este sentido, España considera importante definir el papel y la responsabilidad en los procedimientos de la revisión global, el cual es un proceso que debe ser liderado por las partes con el apoyo de los órganos subsidiarios y la Secretaría, asegurando la legitimidad de sus resultados, tanto a nivel técnico como a nivel político. Por ello, agradecemos la discusión y el mandato propuesto en la nota preparada por la Secretaría en el documento 25.3. Consideramos de crucial importancia garantizar la legitimidad de sus conclusiones, especialmente entre las partes, tanto a nivel técnico como político. La nota de la Secretaría prevé la creación de un comité asesor, el cual trabaje bajo la supervisión general de la Mesa del SBSTTA. Sin embargo, nos gustaría que la Secretaría nos proporcionase más información sobre el comité, sus funciones y su membresía. Nos gustaría que el anteproyecto desarrollase aún más las acciones concretas para integrar la participación y el diálogo con todas las partes interesadas, por lo que realizamos sugerencias de texto para permitir la participación de los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, las mujeres, los jóvenes, las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, el mundo académico, los sectores privado y financiero y las partes interesadas de todos los demás sectores relevantes, en los párrafos 3i y 5 bis, para asegurar una exitosa implementación. También nos gustaría recalcar que el proceso de revisión global debe ser un proceso impulsado por las partes y no simplemente un informe independiente. En ese sentido, consideramos importante indicar de manera clara las fuentes de información que deben tenerse en cuenta en la elaboración del informe global, por lo que nos gustaría introducir la referencia a todos los resultados importantes de IPBES y otras fuentes, lo cual incluimos en nuestras propuestas de enmienda en los párrafos 1 y 3 del proyecto de recomendación. Acogemos con agrado la propuesta de los debates de alto nivel y consideramos que el diseño de los procedimientos concretos de la revisión global debería proporcionar una base para acciones futuras y respuestas relevantes. Nos gustaría que el proceso fuese inclusivo también en lo referente a otros acuerdos multilaterales pertinentes y para ello debería solicitarse la opinión de las secretarías de dichos acuerdos en relación con el proceso de revisión global. Por último, solicitamos una serie de mejoras en el anexo 2 sobre el grupo asesor científico en el párrafo 4 respecto a la designación de organizaciones internacionales. Hemos enviado nuestras propuestas por escrito a la Secretaría. Muchas gracias, presidente.
Gracias, España. Doy la palabra ahora a Brasil, seguido de Camerún y Suiza.
Thank you, Chair. We take this opportunity to provide some preliminary comments on the potential structure of the global report as described in Section 3 of document 25/3. As a cross-cutting concern, we believe that previous editions of the Global Biodiversity Outlook have often neglected the specific challenges and circumstances faced by developing countries, thus undermining the sense of ownership of the review of implementation of the Convention. Therefore, we would highlight the need to consider those specific challenges and circumstances to the different sections and chapters of the proposed global report. The global report should also consider the three objectives of the Convention in a balanced manner. Regarding question 2 and the corresponding section 3, we would stress that potential options for actions need to be identified on a flexible and non-prescriptive basis to ensure the non-intrusive nature of the mechanisms for planning, monitoring, reviewing, as agreed upon under COP15 decision 15/6. Furthermore, we are of the view that section 4 is out of the mandate of the Convention, as is not the Convention's role to assess the implementation of other MEAs. We also believe that the report must include a dedicated section on means of implementation to assess its provision to developing countries, and we would request the Executive Secretary to revise the aforementioned sections accordingly. Regarding the potential sources of scientific and technical inputs, as presented in paragraph 3 of the proposed draft resolution, Brazil would further stress the need to prioritize intergovernmentally reviewed and adopted assessments, in particular relevant summaries for policymakers from IPBES, as they provide a balanced approach towards the best available scientific evidence and policy-relevant considerations. While we acknowledge the work of the IPCC, we understand not all IPCC reports relate to topics under review by the Convention. Moreover, we struggle to understand the references to the International Resource Panel, which is not an intergovernmental platform like IPBES and IPCC. We'd also recommend caution regarding the use of information drawn on component and complementary indicators, as they are of a voluntary nature and should not prejudge which actions are to be undertaken by parties. Furthermore, we understand that the global review of collective progress is a party-driven process, and we would like to highlight the need to ensure the transparency and inclusivity of the global review of progress in all its stages. Thus, we would request the Executive Secretary to submit a draft version of the global report to peer review by contracting parties prior to its finalization. We will be submitting our comments in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. Now I'll give the floor to Cameroon, followed by Switzerland and Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Cameroon is speaking on behalf of the African Group. Africa welcomed the Secretariat note on the scientific, technical, and technological inputs that should inform the global review of collective progress in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. In this respect, the completion of a global review requires a monitoring framework with specific, measurable, achievable, and time-bound indicators. We recognize the importance of the 5th edition of the Global Biodiversity Outlook as periodic reports on biological biodiversity, and welcome the process to consider how to conduct a global review to collective progress in the implementation of the framework based on national reports and, as appropriate, other sources of information. In the view of the evolution of the content of the 5 previous GBO, we inference have evolved over time according to the needs of the Convention and the request of the COP. We believe that continuing the Global Biodiversity Outlook branding and using this name for the global report should be not the major concern. However, there is a dire need to ensure that the content and structure of the Outlook is relevant and coherent with the GBF and also in accordance with its mechanism for planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. In additional clear Inclusive and transparent modalities should be established to ensure parties' contribution to the report. Africa welcomed the inclusion of Section 5 in the proposed structure, which should address, among other things, the strategic aspect of means of implementation as prescribed on Section I as implementation and support mechanism and enabling condition of the GBF. In our understanding that the extent to which developing countries implement their action to the GBF is highly dependent on the resources provided by developed countries. In that regard, Africa calls for an in-depth examination of this issue that will address the review of the timeliness, adequacy, and relevancy of resource provided, including finance, capacity buildings, and technological transfer. This will address the major concern expressed by some parties on the need to include a detailed analysis of adequacy, predictability, accessibility of the means of implementation for developing countries. Also, Africa welcomed the establishment of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group for the preparation of the global report on collective progress in the implementation of the GBF, whose collaboration with the two subsidiary bodies, SBSTTA and SBI, deserve further clarification with regard to the information presented in Section 2,
Please
Para
conclude,
12,
Cameroon.
and Section 5, Para 5 on the Secretariat note. Details of our contribution will be said in the contact group. Thank you.
Thank you, Cameroon. I remind parties to maintain under the 3 minutes interventions. Now I'll give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Germany and the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Switzerland considers the global review of collective progress to be a critical element of the multidimensional approach to planning, monitoring, reporting, and review. Given the mandates to SBI to provide advice on the concrete procedures of the global review and the mandate to SBSTTA to give scientific inputs, it is our expectation that the concrete elements of the procedures will be discussed at SBI 4 in a comprehensive way, and that the discussion in this meeting focus on scientific inputs. With this in mind, we consider the pre-session document for this item to be a good basis for discussion, as the proposed recommendations focus on the parts of the global review that require scientific input. However, we would like to highlight the following proposed changes. Regarding paragraph 1 on the global report, in line with Norway, Switzerland is of the view that the report should be clearly distinguished from the previous GBOs. In our view, it should include the following main elements. The first element should provide an overview of the state of and trends in biodiversity based on scientific assessments, including from IPBES. A second and main element should analyze collective progress based on the national reports by parties. A third element should analyze the contributions made by other biodiversity-related conventions. And a last element of the report should contain a concluding element addressing gaps and challenging in the implementation. Regarding paragraph 3, Mr. Chair, on sources of the global report. Similar to Spain, we suggest to mention the IPBES assessments and deliverables more prominently with a separate subparagraph to underline its importance and relevance. On subparagraph F, we suggest to add databases, as in our review, databases such as GBIF can be valuable sources for the report. Furthermore, we suggest to add also information by biodiversity-related conventions as a source. The Bern 3 conference that will take place in January 2024 and is organized by UNEP will bring together parties from biodiversity-related conventions to discuss cooperation for the implementation of the GBF. The outcomes of Bern 3 might provide conclusions on how the MEAs can contribute to the global report and to the global review in general. Regarding paragraph 4, on the proposed advisory group, in principle, Switzerland supports a time-bound advisory group as it can contribute to increase party oversight over the development of the report and thereby also increase its legitimacy and ownership by parties. However, there are several open questions regarding the proposed terms of references for the advisory group, including on its roles and tasks. And finally, Mr. Chair, on paragraph 6 and 7 regarding IPBES, We have some suggested additions to welcome all relevant IPES assessments and also to stress their importance as inputs to the global review process. We will hand in the proposed changes in writing. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. And apologies, Cameron, I didn't recall correctly that you were speaking on behalf of the region, on your region. Now I'll give the floor to Russian Federation, followed by the United Kingdom and Netherlands.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Мы, несомненно, признаем важность подготовки глобального отчета и поддерживаем участие в НТТК в процессе подготовки такого отчета, прежде всего для обеспечения научной и технической грамотности содержания такого отчета. К предложенному проекту рекомендаций есть несколько комментариев, вопросов, предложений. Не совсем ясно предложение в параграфе 3 в пункте А и Б. В чем здесь принципиальное различие? Означает ли выделение отдельного пункта Б, что мы выходим за пределы национальных отчетов? И нам представляется, что этого быть не должно, так как уже целый ряд с других стран отметило, этот отчет должен быть отчетом сторон конвенции. И нам кажется, что все, что написано в пункте Б, уже полностью отражено в пункте А. Поэтому мы предлагаем исключить пункт Б. В пункте 3 нам представляется целесообразным отметить то, что также отмечалось рядом стран, а именно включить в список материалов информационных, которые должны использоваться для глобального отчета, использовать, во-первых, ряд индикаторов, которые являются общими, например, в отчетах по целям устойчивого развития. Мы знаем, что мы часть этих индикаторов напрямую взяли. А также, конечно, смотреть на отчеты по иным конвенциям, связанным с биоразнообразием, и прямо отразить это в тексте. Мы с удовлетворением отмечаем развитие работы внутри ИБЭС и, если хотите, взросление этой организации, включая разнообразие тематик и глобальный их охват. С учетом этого мы не уверены в целесообразности продолжения работы по созданию Global Biodiversity Outlook в прежнем виде. И считаем, что выделение ресурсов секретариата на это может быть не особо оправдано, а лучше мы решим на конференции сторон, что мы просим и поручаем это ИБЭС. Или если какой-то отчет по типу GBO сохранится, может быть, он должен иметь другое название. Мы поддерживаем в целом создание сбалансированной группы. Есть вопросы по параграфу 2, параграфу 3 о том, как формируется эта группа. Там написано, что она формируется правительствами. Означает ли это, что правительства должны номинировать представителей коренных народов, молодежи, академии и так далее? Это не совсем обычная практика в нашей системе. И мы готовы, так сказать, посмотреть на, и есть определенные предложения по заданию для этой группы, но в целом считаем полезным. Спасибо.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Now I'll give the floor to United Kingdom, followed by Netherlands and Belgium.
Thank you, Chair. A global review process which is evidence-based, participatory, party-driven, and with clear timelines, roles, and responsibilities is fundamental to the achievement of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and its goals and targets. The UK would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing the note, including the draft recommendation to SBI on the concrete procedures for the global review. It is a good basis for discussion. We strongly support a global report of collective progress as a key input to the global review process. The report should clearly demonstrate our collective progress against each goal and target and any gaps in implementation to allow COP17 and COP19 to agree clear recommendations on what further action may be needed to address any potential gaps. It should be based on a range of best available evidence and information sources, but the recommendation does not need to list all the possible sources. We suggest the list included in the draft recommendation is sufficient. We also support establishing an ad hoc scientific and technical advisory group to assist with the preparation of the global report, and also to provide other relevant technical and scientific inputs to the global review process. An advisory group composed of experts nominated by parties, but also observers, will ensure that both the global report and the global review process are scientifically sound and have the necessary party oversight. We suggest the global report and review process could be further supported by a light-touch technical dialogue between parties, experts, and stakeholders to help increase parties' understanding of the technical inputs, analysis, and findings that underpin the global report and global review process. The roles and responsibilities of these bodies and their relationship with SBSTTA and SBI should be clearly set out. Distinguished delegates, it is the subsidiary body on implementation which has been mandated to develop the concrete procedures for the global review of collective progress. That said, we feel we can all agree that the global review process in its entirety, not just its particular elements, should be informed by the best available evidence and science, including that provided by IPBES assessments. We therefore believe that SBSTTA, the Technical Advisory Group, and the Technical Dialogue have an important role to play in providing scientific, technical, and technological advice on not just the global report, but also the other elements of the global review process as appropriate. Time is not on our side for developing the concrete procedures. The more concrete progress we can make here, the stronger foundation we will have for our discussion on this critical issue at SBI in May next year. We have provided our proposed amendments to the Secretariat in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, UK. Now I'll give the floor to Netherlands, followed by Belgium and New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Netherlands would like to highlight the importance of a phased approach to the global review, wherein the review is transparent, scientifically supported, and inclusive. In this regard, we support the position of the EU. As such, the Netherlands supports the establishment of the Technical Advisory Group, as well as the Scientific Committee, to ensure that relevant scientific expertise is available to assess progress of the review. The Netherlands also stresses that the roles and respective responsibilities of these two bodies should be clear. The Netherlands want to highlight the importance to include various information sources in the global review process, including national reports, IPBES assessments, and inputs from different multilateral environmental agreements to fully reflect different perspectives and available data on the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Finally, the Netherlands stresses the importance to include various stakeholders as well as right holders in the review process. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Netherlands. I'll give the floor to Belgium, followed by New Zealand and Sweden. Microphone to Belgium, please.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start again. Belgium agrees with the intervention of several parties before us, like Norway, Spain, Brazil, and Cameroon, on the mention that the global review is a process. And we agree also with the intervention from the Netherlands and some other EU countries. We are of the opinion that paragraph 6 of the draft recommendation with regards to welcome decision of IPBES is better placed in the preamble. We also agree with the proposal from Spain and Switzerland on the insertion of an additional paragraph to stress the importance of the rolling work program of IPBES for the global review. With regards to the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group, mentioned in the draft decisions or recommendations, we agree with the establishment of this group, but we are of the opinion that it should be a time-bound ad hoc advisory group for the global review to avoid confusion with the informal advisory group for technical and scientific cooperation mentioned in COP decision 15/8. With regards to the annex that is talking about the mandate of this ad hoc advisory group, it needs some improvement, like Russia has mentioned, on who can nominate participants, and we will give some wording for that. We also would like to add a paragraph on the honorarium of the members of this group and propose to use the wording already mentioned in decision COP/15/8, Annex 3, paragraph 12. We will submit our comments in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. I will give the floor to Sweden, followed by France and Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sweden takes note of document Subsidiary 25 on scientific, technical and technological inputs that should inform the global review on collective progress. For Sweden, as for others, it is important to consider the global review of collective progress as a process that includes different stages and not only a report of collective progress. The global review process should include an information gathering phase that will provide inputs for a global review report, a technical dialogue phase to anchor and discuss the findings of the information gathering phase, a political phase to elevate the findings of the global review, and to offer appropriate political recognition of the status of collective progress as well as of required actions for its achievement of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, as well as a response phase to improve implementation on national level. The global review process should be a party-led process, and parties must have opportunity to review a global report. And SBSTTA and SBI need to be able to provide advice within their respective mandates. Sweden is of the view that a global review report should include a summary of the state of biodiversity based on available reports by IPBES, the IPCC, local biodiversity outlooks, and other relevant reports of MEAs and other appropriate peer-reviewed scientific sources. A review of collective progress towards the goals and targets of the GBF based on national reports, the headline indicators and binary indicator questions, as well as progress towards the implementation of sections C, I, J, and K of the framework. A conclusion exploring options for addressing any identified gaps and challenges in the implementation, including a summary of gaps and data and knowledge. Regarding the contribution of IPBES, we note that the document is not referring to all important existing and upcoming IPBES deliverables in the related section. We therefore propose to consider them in the recommendation. Sweden would welcome if the global report would also address synergies with other relevant conventions and processes, including the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the results of the Bern III Conference on Cooperation among Biodiversity-related conventions for the implementation of the GBF and its follow-up process. Contributions by non-state actors should also be considered, and these should highlight contributions from indigenous peoples and local communities, women, and youth. Sweden supports the establishment of a time-bound, ad hoc scientific technological advisory group, including experts nominated by parties and relevant observers to support the information gathering phase. We have further recommendations for amendments that we will provide in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sweden. So I've been listening to many comments on the work needed on the recommendation and also in the terms of reference. So we will need to work on this. Having said that, I still have a long list of speakers, and we have for this afternoon the intention to deal with 3 documents. Seems there's a lot of work to do. So we all recognize this is very important. We all recognize we need to work with SBI. We need to do our part. This is the connection with SBI for this mechanism. So maybe if your following interventions go straight to points on the recommendation, on the terms of reference, in the sense that we will need to, very probably, to establish a contact group to work, to save time on that, and keep very concrete your interventions. Now I'll give the floor to France, Colombia, and followed by China as well. France.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La France tient à souligner l'importance de cette discussion sur les éléments techniques et scientifiques à mobiliser pour la revue globale du cadre mondial pour la biodiversité de Kunming-Montréal. Pour la France, la revue globale de la mise en œuvre est un processus, piloté par les parties et soutenu par la science. Nous saluons la qualité du papier produit et ses recommandations, et saluons le fait que le rapport global sur la mise en œuvre constitue une phase importante de ce processus. À ce titre, l'inclusion des évaluations de l'IPBES au sein de ce processus est essentielle. Nous prenons note des propositions faites dans le projet de recommandation, mais nous aimerions voir l'inclusion des évaluations passées, en cours et à venir, car nous pensons que les travaux précédents de la plateforme sont tout aussi pertinents pour l'élaboration de ce rapport global sur la mise en œuvre. Nous saluons également la proposition d'avoir un comité consultatif afin d'améliorer l'inclusion des parties et de leurs experts dans le processus d'élaboration du rapport mondial d'une manière inclusive et équilibrée. Nous pensons qu'il est pertinent que l'IPBES puisse également y contribuer. Nous nous alignons enfin sur les propos de l'Espagne et des Pays-Bas sur le besoin d'une meilleure inclusion des acteurs non étatiques. Nous vous enverrons nos propositions par commentaire. Merci.
Merci la France. Ahora doy la palabra a Colombia, seguido de China y Turquía.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. En nombre de Colombia, quisiera dar las siguientes consideraciones respecto al tema 3B. Primero que todos los reportes del marco global deben dar cabida también a información directa de otros actores, principalmente sector privado, sector académico y pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, así como fomentar que dicha información sea incluida de manera efectiva por las partes en sus reportes nacionales. Consideramos que se debe utilizar de algunas de las plataformas que ya apoyan la aplicación del marco Kunming-Montreal, como el CHM, para establecer una interfaz para el informe global. Dadas las diversas plataformas, CHM, Plataforma Panorama, el ENVISAP Forum, entre otras, es necesario coordinar y promover espacios conjuntos entre iniciativas para evitar duplicidades. Es importante armonizar los tiempos para que el informe global comience una vez realizados los primeros informes nacionales en el 2026, ya que constituirán una fuente de información fundamental. En cuanto a las preguntas propuestas para el informe mundial sobre los progresos colectivos en la implementación del marco, consideramos que deben incluir información sobre qué actores están implementando el marco global de biodiversidad. Igualmente, debe evaluar los esfuerzos para erradicar la pobreza, desarrollando indicadores que permitan hacer esta evaluación. Finalmente, la pregunta sobre las AMUMAS debería tener una doble cobertura con un adecuado nivel de filtro para referirse a los acuerdos que inciden directamente por ser ambientales y a los que inciden indirectamente como los relacionados con comercio y propiedad intelectual. Por lo anterior, consideramos pertinente incluir fuentes, informes y reportes de otras convenciones y acuerdos multilaterales. Colombia solicita que se pueda considerar que la fecha límite de presentación del séptimo reporte nacional sea en abril de 2026 y no en enero de 2026 como está previsto, para que las partes tengan el tiempo necesario para ajustar lo que corresponda. Respecto a las aportaciones de la IPBES a la aplicación del marco global de biodiversidad, no deberían circunscribirse únicamente a la futura segunda evaluación global, pues debería incluir algunas de las evaluaciones temáticas adelantadas. Sobre el grupo de asesoramiento científico y técnico que haga aportaciones científicas, técnicas y tecnológicas para preparar el informe, se debe tener en cuenta que el monto y la disponibilidad de los recursos, lo cual no está claro en la propuesta. Adicionalmente, sugerimos incluir también un carácter ex officio a los co-chairs del CSP, quienes pueden llevar a este escenario las voces de los miembros de este consorcio científico de apoyo al CBD. Los demás comentarios los enviaremos a la Secretaría. Gracias, presidente.
Muchas gracias, Colombia. Ahora doy la palabra a China, seguido de Turquía y Canadá.
感谢主席，中方感谢秘书处所做的工作。当前的案文是全球审查机制制定的良好基础。中方欢迎设立集体执行进度全球报告的科学和技术咨询小组。 认可全球报告在评估 GBF 目标进展
I'm sorry, China, but I believe there is no translation into English.
和促进实施中所发挥的重要作用，强调。Sorry.
There is no translation. There is no translation. Yes, this is stop and they start again.
Can technicians ensure that there is translation from Chinese into the various languages, please?
It looks like now you can continue.
Okay, thank you.
Again from the beginning.
感谢主席，中方感谢秘书处所做的工作，认为当前的建议案文是全球审查机制制定的良好基础。
Would you like to start again, please? Can you start again, China?
You could start again, please. No. Just again your speech. You could
now?
start again your speech. Yes, now.
OK， 谢谢主席。No.
No. How's it?
OK， OK， 感谢大家的patience。中方感谢秘书处所做的工作。当前的建议案文是全球审查机制制定的良好基础。中方欢迎设立集体执行进度全球报告的科学和技术咨询小组。
Looks like now the problem is in English. So 1 second. They're really sorry. Now they are ready. So sorry if you could start again.
OK，
We can go now.
OK， 好，谢谢主席，谢谢大家的这个容忍。中方非常感谢秘书处所做。
Apologies. It's a technical problem.
Yeah.
No, it's okay.
OK， 中方感谢大家的容忍，感谢秘书处所做的工作。当前的建议案文是全球审查机制制定的良好基础。中方欢迎设立集体执行进度全球报告的科学和技术咨询小组，认可全球报告在评估 GBF 目标进展和实施中所发挥的重要作用，强调这一进程必须尊重各国主权，以缔约方驱动的方式开展。中方认为，全球报告的信息输入应体现可靠、可得、及时、全面、透明，推进全球审查结果具有可信度和指导性。中方强调，全球审查应实现行动和进展，重在促进相互学习、相互理解，发现困难和障碍，共同寻找更佳的解决方案，共同实现 GBF 目标。谢谢主席，谢谢大家。
Thank you, China. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Now we'll give the floor to Turkey, followed by Canada and Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the components of the global review, our suggestions is for the support of the activities to include scientific analysis of emerging issues and trends that may impact biodiversity conservation and sustainable use for future. This analysis can help identify new challenges and opportunities that should be addressed to effectively implement GBF. It should consider factors such as climate change, technological advancements, land use changes, and socioeconomic developments. In a similar manner, we support the consideration the need for updated targets and indicators to reflect the evolving understanding of biodiversity conservation and the changing context, as it can help ensure that the GBF remains relevant and responsive to new challenges and scientific knowledge. Considering global report mentioned in the document, indeed it raises important concerns that deserve further consideration. The report should fully align with the specific goals and objectives set forth in this GBF. The GBF represents a new and ambitious phase in global biodiversity conservation efforts. It introduces specific targets and goals that go beyond the previous strategic plans for biodiversity. Therefore, the global report should address these new objectives and priorities. To effectively track progress toward the GBF goals, it is crucial to prioritize the availability of comprehensive and up-to-date data. This includes data on species populations, habitat conservation, ecosystem health, and other relevant indicators. The report should ensure that these data sources are not only accessible, but also scientifically robust. GBF emphasizes transformative change in how we interact with and conserve biodiversity. It focuses on addressing the underlying drivers of biodiversity loss, such as land use change, climate change, and sustainable consumption and production patterns. That's why the global report must align with these objectives and highlight efforts to address these drivers. The report should not only assess the current state of biodiversity, but also address the evolving challenges and opportunities that will shape conservation efforts in the future. We will send our comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to Canada, followed by Argentina and the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would first like to thank the CBD Secretariat for their work in preparing this meeting document. We believe it represents well the views expressed in response to notification 2023-069 and provides all of the key elements needed for the SBSTTA draft recommendation. However, we believe that it will be important for the draft recommendation to remain within the scope mandated by COP15 Decision 15/6 to provide advice on relevant scientific, technical, and technological inputs that should inform the global review. To be clear, we think there is a danger in trying to make the global review report do too much and lose track of its focus, which in our opinion is to review our collective progress in implementing the KMGBF. To this end, Canada will be proposing some amendments to the recommendation text, calling for SBI to further review the recommendation text from SBSTTA to ensure alignment with the broader recommendation on procedures for the global review. We support a global review that takes into account the best available science and information from all relevant sources, including Indigenous knowledge gathered with the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. And we will have some additions to the draft recommendation to reflect this important inclusion. In terms of the scope of the global report, we believe that the focus of the report, as I said earlier, should be first and foremost on meeting the 2030 targets and the 2030 mission, as stated by Norway and Switzerland as well. This will also help us to ensure that we address the concerns expressed by some parties regarding scope and focus, in particular, the concerns expressed here today about reviewing progress on implementing our collective commitments on the means of implementation, which will do, in our view, will be duly covered by reporting on Goal D and targets 19 and 20. Canada does not believe that the report should focus on providing a broader assessment of the status or trends of global biodiversity, given that this is an area of work that has and will continue to be covered as part of the IPBES work, as well as the Global Environment Outlook, and therefore would represent a duplication of efforts if undertaken by the CBD. We share the view of Japan on the need for better coordination between IPBES and the CBD. With regards to the establishment in terms of reference for the advisory group, Canada supports the establishment of this group as a way of helping to ensure that the report is a party-driven process and as a means of supporting SBSTTA in providing advice to SBI, recognizing the responsibility of providing the report on implementation fundamentally falls to the SBI, and that any work done by SBSTTA should feed into that process. Canada is of the view that it should not be the responsibility of the advisory group to suggest new sources of information or input for the report, but rather synthesize and assess the information in the sources listed by parties in the present recommendation. Finally, like the distinguished delegates from Spain, the UK, and others, we believe that observer organizations, in particular organizations representing the distinct views and insights of underrepresented groups, such as Indigenous peoples, women, and youth, should also have the opportunity to nominate experts to participate in the advisory group. Specific textual changes will be forthcoming. Thank you.
Thank you, Canada, and thank you for the reminder to keep under the mandate from the COP. We should resist the temptation to go beyond. This is a bridge between SBSTTA and SBI, and there's a role of SBI to define a number of elements. We should provide advice on the technical elements. for them best to use and make the decisions according to COP mandate. And I also invite you to maintain the time allocated for parties. Ahora doy la palabra a la Argentina, seguido de la Unión Europea y Australia.
Gracias, señor presidente. Como la Argentina siempre ha señalado, la implementación ha sido el talón de Aquiles del Convenio de Diversidad Biológica. Por este motivo, la puesta en marcha de un proceso de revisión de progreso colectivo eficiente y basado en la ciencia es central para lograr cumplir con los objetivos y las metas del Marco Mundial de Kunming-Montreal. En este sentido, la Argentina tiene 5 sugerencias para los insumos científicos, técnicos y tecnológicos del proceso de revisión mundial, contenidos en el documento CBD-SBSTTA-25-3. Primero, la Argentina considera que el informe mundial debe estar principalmente basado en los informes nacionales y en evidencia científica y tecnológica que haya sido considerada por el SBSTA. Segundo, la Argentina considera apropiada la propuesta de preparar un informe mundial que reúna otros insumos científicos para la revisión mundial y que podría mantener el nombre de Global Biodiversity Outlook. Tercero, la Argentina favorece un rol protagónico del SBSTA en la elaboración de dicho informe. Tomamos nota de la estructura propuesta y consideramos que SBSTA deberá realizar una consideración detallada del contenido y preguntas clave. Asimismo, solicitamos que el informe mundial sea revisado por el órgano subsidiario de forma previa a su remisión a la Revisión Mundial de Progreso Colectivo. Cuarto, la Argentina acompaña la creación del Grupo Asesor Científico Técnico para asistir al SBSTA en la tarea de preparar el informe global. Como señalado por muchas otras delegaciones, consideramos necesario trabajar sobre los términos de referencia del Grupo Asesor y que el mismo debe evitar duplicar el trabajo que realiza, por ejemplo, IPBES, por lo que recomendamos retirar de su mandato el trabajo con modelos y escenarios. Finalmente, en quinto lugar, y no por eso menos importante, como señalado por Colombia, Brasil, el Grupo Africano y muchos otros colegas, la Argentina señala que es esencial que los insumos para la revisión mundial de progresos colectivos evalúen la movilización de recursos, particularmente la provisión de medios de implementación de países desarrollados a países en desarrollo. Ya hemos remitido por escrito nuestros comentarios al documento. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Argentina. Ahora doy la palabra a la Unión Europea, seguido de Australia y Costa de Marfil.
Good afternoon, everyone. The EU would like to thank the Executive Secretary for the draft document on the concrete procedures for the global review of collective progress in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework to be conducted by the COP at its 17th and 19th meeting. Conscious of the time, the EU will not repeat what has already been said by various parties and would strongly support 2 points in particular. First, to ensure the active engagement in the global review of biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant multilateral environmental agreements and processes at global, regional and sub-regional levels, in particular through the Bern process. Second, when preparing the global report, to use all relevant sources at global, regional and sub-regional levels, and in particular the latest assessment from the IPBES. The EU is convinced that the new procedures and contents to be adopted at SBI will ensure the delivery of a substantially improved and robust evidence-based inclusive global review of implementation of collective progress in the implementation of the GBF. Sorry, it's quite a long sentence. The EU supports the establishment of a scientific and technical advisory group to assist SBSTA and stands ready to actively contribute to the provision of scientific, technical and technological inputs for its preparation. We support the changes of the recommendation and annex as proposed in the Wilm report and will provide them in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, EU. Now, I'll give the floor to Australia, followed by Cote d'Ivoire and South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. Australia strongly supports the need for robust monitoring, reporting and review, while acknowledging the reporting challenges faced by many developing country parties, particularly small island developing states and least developed countries. Australia welcomes the approach of reporting and reviewing collective progress, with reporting to COP17 and COP19. We wish to see a robust scientific, technical and technological basis for the review, drawing on the best available information and working with existing national reporting processes to avoid undue reporting burden. Australia supports the proposed scientific, technical and technological inputs to the global report, which will inform the global review, while importantly respecting the relevant mandates of each of the subsidiary bodies. We support the establishment of a scientific and technical advisory group for the assurance that the science and technical aspects of the global report are adequately addressed, and also to ensure a party-led process, which will need defined roles and responsibilities to avoid duplicating effort. Australia proposes 2 minor text edits in paragraph 5 to clarify the reference to the advisory group, and in paragraph 6 to clarify the reference to the IPBES 10 outcomes. We'll submit these proposed amendments directly to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. I've been told that DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, has been asking for the floor many times, but unfortunately do not appear in the system. So I'll give the floor to DRC, and then we will continue with Cote d'Ivoire and then South Africa. So DRC, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, pour la parole. La République démocratique du Congo s'aligne sur la déclaration faite par le Cameroun au nom du groupe africain. Nous appuyons la conservation du titre Perspective mondiale de la biodiversité parce que ceci nous permet de nous projeter dans l'avenir, ce qui constitue directement ou indirectement un outil de plaidoyer auprès des différents partenaires pour plus de mobilisation des ressources à la hauteur des ambitions du cadre. Le rapport mondial devrait être structuré en fonction du contenu du cadre mondial de la biodiversité de Kunming-Montréal, refléter les progrès collectifs vers l'atteinte de la mission et des cibles du cadre. Cela étant, l'élaboration d'un tel rapport nécessite l'équilibre, la justice et l'équité dans la composition du groupe consultatif ad hoc en charge de son élaboration, et une bonne stratégie de vulgarisation devrait être mise en place pour plus d'adhésion et d'appropriation par les différentes parties prenantes. Le cadre mondial de la biodiversité de Kunming-Montréal ayant reconnu le rôle important joué par les peuples autochtones et les communautés locales, les connaissances traditionnelles devront être considérées également comme source d'information. Merci pour la parole.
Thank you, DRC, and I'm sorry for this technical issue. But maybe if somebody let us know, we can give them space since the system is not working properly. Now I'll give the floor to Cote d'Ivoire, followed by South Africa and Germany. And we need to move on. We have 2 documents more for this afternoon session, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. La Côte d'Ivoire soutient la proposition du groupe Afrique faite par le Cameroun. La Côte d'Ivoire salue ce document qui constitue une bonne base pour les discussions et voudrait faire les observations suivantes. Relativement au nom du rapport, la Côte d'Ivoire note que le rapport mondial de la version numéro 1 à la version 5 disponible actuellement a subi plusieurs évolutions sans pourtant changer de nom. Qu'est-ce que nous voulons comme finalité? L'évaluation mondiale de la biodiversité. Comment allons-nous le faire? C'est dire le contenu et la méthodologie. Seuls sont pertinents. Peu importe donc le nom. Seule la finalité et les moyens pour l'atteindre. On pourra donc vivre avec le nom. La Côte d'Ivoire voudrait relever qu'il faut harmoniser l'appellation rapport mondial dans tout le document qui est soumis à notre analyse. Au niveau des recommandations, le point 29, l'alinéa 3, nous pensons que les points C et D doivent être intervertis. Ramener le para D en premier. De ce fait, on va enlever les perspectives mondiales de l'environnement au para C pour pouvoir garder les évaluations connexes de ce paragraphe. À l'alinéa 4, nous pensons que le groupe consultatif qui doit être créé doit fournir des conseils au SBSTTA. Et à l'alinéa 5, ce même groupe doit soutenir les travaux de l'organe subsidiaire, donc le SBI. Il faut revoir donc ces deux paras-là, ces deux derniers alinéas, alinéas 4 et 5. Voilà les observations que je voudrais faire pour le moment. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Kadouba. Now I'll give the floor to South Africa, followed by Germany and New Zealand.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Cameroon on behalf of Africa. South Africa supports elements of the draft recommendations and also supports the suggestion to separate the Global Review report from the Global Biodiversity Outlook. The Global Biodiversity Outlook remains the monitoring tool that gives us the outlook on the state of biodiversity on the ground, more of a global inventory, whilst the Global Review assesses the effectiveness of our performance, tools, and resources to change the status quo of biodiversity. The Global Biodiversity Outlook should therefore serve as a source of information amongst other sources, including global analysis, national reports, etc., for the global review process. It is also important to note that a successful review or evaluation process depends on the availability and quality of data collected. If the outcomes of the global review indicate that we have performed dismally or excellently as a collective, the evidence of that should be seen through the Global Outlook report, whether it's painting a positive or negative state of biodiversity. With regards to the global review, there will be a midterm review or evaluation at COP17 on what we did achieve. This should focus on the extent to which the GBF is being implemented and the extent to which tools and resources have been made available and are being utilized for the implementation of the GBF. In addition, relevant evaluation questions should be developed to assess whether the GBF's operational mechanisms support the achievement of the objectives or not, and if not, why. Based on the outcomes of the midterm review, the COP would then make recommendations to enhance and accelerate implementation where needed. Furthermore, by COP19, focus would be on global impact review to look more on what impact has the GBF had towards the 2050 vision and its goals. Also assessing the effectiveness of the GBF implementation tools and commensurate resources towards the 2050 vision and its goals. Impact evaluation questions would need to be developed in this regard to guide the review or evaluation process. The outcomes of this evaluation is what would inter alia inform the next generation of strategies or frameworks of the convention. We will submit our comments in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Africa. Now I'll give the floor to Germany, followed by New Zealand and the representative of IPLCs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like many other parties have mentioned before, Germany is of the view that the global review of progress in the implementation of the GBF should be a process with different phases rather than a standalone document such as the GBO. I will try to keep it short and stress that the inputs to the global review should feed into this process and include the following sources which are not yet represented adequately. First, assessments, reports and other deliverables of IPPES. Second, reports from voluntary country reviews. Third, information on non-state actor commitments, including disaggregated information on contributions from IPLCs, women and youth. Fourth and last, relevant information on implementation from biodiversity-related conventions and other MEAs. We have more comments on the concrete structure of the report which we will hand in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Germany. Now I give the floor to New Zealand.
Thank you very much, Chair. New Zealand considers it vital that any global review report or technical synthesis produced under SBSTTA should be a trusted and credible input to the further stages of the global review to be conducted under the SBI and COP. For this reason, in paragraph 1, we can support the idea of a global review report as part of the scientific and technical assessment process. However, if this report is to be produced by SBSTTA, we think its scope needs to take into account the different roles of SBSTTA and SBI in the global review procedures. In New Zealand's view, the role of SBSTTA will be to oversee the information gathering and technical information phase of the global review. For example, including an information gathering stage with all inputs to be available to all parties and an analytical stage involving consideration and synthesis of inputs. So for this reason, we would also support the proposed technical dialogue suggested by the UK. A summary report, though, on the collective progress and implementation, which could take into account the technical synthesis produced by SBSTTA, however, might be best produced by SBI. Putting aside the issue of these different roles, we have the following suggestions for the draft recommendation. New Zealand agrees that the paragraph, with others, that the paragraph 1 chapeau should make it clearer that the global review report will focus on reviewing collective progress against the Kunming-Montreal GBF, rather than focus on providing a progress report on the status and trends of biodiversity. In paragraphs 1A and B, we support the stated focus on assessing progress against each global target, but we suggest that we also include the 2030 mission and Section C of the KMGBF on cross-cutting considerations. In the same vein, as proposed by Canada, we think that the report should include the contribution of Indigenous knowledge with free, prior, informed consent. In addition, New Zealand, in addition to the status and trends in biodiversity, New Zealand suggests that we should also include the impacts of drivers and policy interventions on biodiversity and ecosystem services to further support the policy relevance of the final global report and its ability to inform the next stages of the global review. This is because it will be important that the assessment of progress should include both the outputs of parties' efforts, such as their actions, as well as the outcomes and the effectiveness of their interventions against each target. So for this reason, we also support inclusion of models and scenarios. In relation to paragraph 4 and whether we need an advisory group, we think this proposal needs further discussion amongst parties. An alternative approach might be for a technical consideration by parties of all the sources of input with a summary synthesis report produced by a pair of co-facilitators. So we think we should discuss further what is the intended scope and purpose of the global review report and how it is best produced. We have further similar comments on the annex, and we look forward to engaging on this further. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. With this, we finish with requests from parties. I have a request from IPLCs, IUCN, women and youth, and with this I'll close the list in order to be quick and go straight to the establishment of a contact group. I hear many comments on different elements for the recommendations and also for the annex with the terms of reference. So we should go straight to that. So I ask the speakers to be very succinct. I'll give the floor to IPLCs, 225, followed by IUCN and women.
The International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity welcomes the document CBD/SBSTTA-25/3 for the guidance provided with respect to the scientific, technical, and technological inputs that should inform the global review of collective progress in the implementation of the KM-GBF. IIFB underlines that these inputs also diverse knowledge systems and traditional knowledge covered under Articles HJ, 10C, and other related provisions of the Convention. COP15, by its decision 15/10, decided to convene a 12th meeting of the open-ended working group HJ in November this year to develop a new program of work and to propose institutional arrangements on Article HJ and other provisions of the Convention related to indigenous peoples and local communities. The IIFB therefore proposes to add the words traditional knowledge to the following paragraphs under Section V, recommendations of SBSTA 23/3. Preambular paragraphs 2 and 4 to read as follows: underscoring the critical importance of scientific, technical, and technological inputs, including traditional knowledge, in the review of progress in the implementation of the CBD and the GBF. Recognizing also the role of the SBSTA in providing advice on relevant scientific, technical, and technological matters, including traditional knowledge, pertaining to the review of collective progress in the implementation of the framework, including to inform the global review of collective progress. Substantive paragraphs 2 and 4 to read as follows: emphasizes that the global report should draw upon the best available scientific and technical evidence, including traditional knowledge. 4, also decides to establish a scientific and technical advisory group in consultation with the Bureau of the SBSTA to provide scientific, technical, and technological inputs, including traditional knowledge and experts from indigenous peoples and local communities for the preparation of the global report on collective progress in the implementation of the framework, with the terms of reference provided in Annex 2 to the present decision, and that the group shall report to the subsidiary body. IIFB is seeking the support from parties for our proposals to be added to the recommendations under Agenda 3B. IIFB's proposals are supported by the earlier paragraphs contained in SBSTA 23/3, which are contained in our full statement posted in the SBSTA 25 webpage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, IPLCs. I will ask if there is party supporting. I see at least 1, 2 hands. Thank you very much for the support for these inclusions. Now I'll give the floor to IUCN, followed by women and youth.
Thank you, Chair. The global review of progress must take stock and inform subsequent revisions of national action plans and targets to increase ambition and ultimately support the achievement of the GBF's mission and vision. Chair, the list of the sources of information contained in paragraph 3 of the draft COP recommendation should consider sources for the global review, not only sources for a global report. IUCN invites parties to expand the list of sources of information to include, where relevant and as appropriate, national implementation reports of other multilateral environmental agreements, especially biodiversity-related conventions. Like France, Belgium, Germany, and others, IUCN notes that the contributions from non-state actors are not being explicitly considered. The template for the 7th national report does not provide appropriate space nor guidance to take their actions into account, and their inclusion is optional in the NBSAP template. A global review of collective progress while being party-led would be incomplete without accounting for the contributions of the whole of society. IUCN puts forward its members' contribution for nature platform. It could be an important information source in this respect. Finally, Chair, IUCN suggests that the questions to be answered through the scientific and technical inputs could also be included as an annex in the draft recommendation. Gracias, Presidente.
Muchas gracias, UICN. Now I'll give the floor to women, followed by youth.
Thank you, Chair. The Global Biodiversity Progress Report should be rooted in a human rights-based approach, including a gender-responsive perspective and founded on diverse systems of knowledge and values. Just as the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was framed with inclusivity, gender equality, and human rights as core aspects of its implementation, the report should include data on progress on all human rights, gender justice, and social equity aspects of the implementation of the framework in line with Section C. The report should include a human rights perspective and recognize the contribution and voices of indigenous people, women, youth, and local communities. It should embrace cultural wisdoms and local knowledge, so the sources of information should respect a variety of voices and include culturally sensitive and gender-responsive data. For that, we ask parties' support for the following insertion. Under Section 1, on possible elements of the Global Review of Collective Progress, in Para 10b, in third line, after national contributions, add the following: as well as contribution of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth. In the same section, Para 10c, line 6, to add after discussions among parties, to add other governments, right holders, and stakeholders. In the same section, add a new para 10f on collective contributions of indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth, to recognize those as a key element of the global review. It should be based on a broad variety of information sources, including the local biodiversity outlook. The composition of the scientific and technical advisory group for the Global Biodiversity Progress Report should be based on criteria of inclusivity and self-representation. We explicitly ask for 5 dedicated representatives from IPLCs, women, youth groups within the advisory group. And the criteria used for member selection must encompass a reference to the social and cultural aspect of biodiversity and not only ecological trends. For that, we ask party support for the following insertions. In Annex 2, terms of reference of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group in paragraph 4 in line 3 after research institution to add the following: and 5 representatives nominated by indigenous peoples and local communities, women and youth groups. And in paragraph 5a to add at the end of it, as well as social and cultural aspects of biodiversity. Finally, sufficient resources must be mobilized to ensure such a holistic and balanced approach to the global report, including for capacity building and supporting the full and effective participation of right holders in this process. We would like the Chair to ask party to show support for our considerations. Thank you.
Thank you, representative of women. I would like to see if there are parties supporting the different suggestions. I see at least 2 hands. Thank you very much. And last speaker, representative of youth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. We highlight the critical importance of ensuring that the contributions of the collective actions of indigenous people and local communities, women and youth, are clearly and concretely counted as a key input. We support parties who stated that the global review process must be inclusive and right-based, including by ensuring these perspectives and those representing diverse knowledge systems are represented in the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group by their own nomination. With this recommendation, to strengthen the role of non-state actors in the global review process, we must be cautious about possibilities of this process being a mechanism for greenwashing and promoting false solutions that don't support the objectives of the Convention. Therefore, the global review must ensure for transparency and accountability if it's to consider inputs from business and industry that could hold conflicts of interest. It will be crucial to dedicate enough attention to cover the indirect drivers of biodiversity loss, including economic drivers. This must be applied in approaches to scenarios and modeling for the global review, ensuring that this not simplify trade-offs between environmental, social, and economic aspects. Local biodiversity outlooks provides important perspectives on such pathways and transition, and therefore represent valuable inputs to this process in this regard. In addition to reports of the GEF, including on the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, we further propose consideration of reports covering domestic, international, public, and private source to sufficiently map value, allocation, and source of financial resources. Finally, we look forward to persuading work to documenting youth contribution to the targets of the Cumin Montreal GBF. We look forward to following the discussion on the global review in shaping our own efforts of the documentation to be as helpful and relevant as possible for this process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for your intervention, representative of youth. With this, we finish the list of speakers. So it's been a very rich discussion on many issues. We note some areas of convergence. However, considering the complexity and the importance of this issue, it is not surprising that we also have a range of views that requires further discussion. So after hearing your interventions, I propose to establish a contact group, and the mandate of the contact group will be to discuss the recommendations and also Annex 2 of Document 3, containing the terms of reference of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Group for the preparation of the global report, and the full name. This contact group will be co-chaired by Mr. Gott Boy Hansen from Norway and Mr. Bilal Quishnat from Jordan. The contact group and the time and the venue will be announced in due course. Thank you very much, delegates. With this, we finish our deliberations on 3B. Now we will take up item 3C on approaches to identify scientific and technical needs to support the implementation of the framework, including implication for the programs of work of the Convention. I now invite the Secretariat to take the floor to introduce item 3C.
Thank you, Chair. In paragraph 8 of Decision 15.4, the Conference of the Parties decided that the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework would be used as a strategic plan for the implementation of the Convention and its protocols, its bodies and its secretariat over the period 2022 to 2030, and that in this regard the framework should be used to better align and direct the work of the various bodies of the Convention and its protocols, its secretariat and its budget. In paragraph 9 of the same decision, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to conduct a strategic review and analysis of the programs of work of the Convention in the context of the framework to facilitate its implementation. Similarly, in paragraphs 4 and 5 of Decision 1524, the Conference of the Parties requested the Executive Secretary to develop a strategic review and analysis, respectively, of the Program of Work on Marine and Coastal Biodiversity and the Program of Work on Island Biodiversity in the context of supporting the implementation of the framework. Pursuant to these requests, the Secretariat conducted a rapid analysis of some of the programs of work established under the Convention with respect to the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The rapid analysis is contained in document CBD/Substa/25/INF1. This analysis provided the basis for the findings contained in document CBD/Substa/25/4, which contains a description of the approach, overarching gaps identified through the rapid analysis, and a description of potential approaches to further intersessional work on this issue in advance of the 26th meeting of the subsidiary body. The subsidiary body is invited to consider the draft recommendations provided in the document. In doing so, the subsidiary body may wish to note that further intersessional work is envisaged prior to Substa 26. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Secretariat. Dear colleagues, the rapid analysis prepared by the Secretariat is not intended to be a comprehensive review of all work that has been undertaken under the Convention that may be relevant to the framework, nor is it meant to imply that every program of work should have explicit guidance that reflects every element of each of the targets of the framework. Rather, it provides an overview of previous guidance from the COP in these respective program areas that can inform the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework and a basis to identify major gaps that may exist across the Convention. Please also note, as set out in the document for this item, it is envisaged that parties and observers will have further opportunities to provide additional inputs on specific programs of work in the intersessional period for further consideration at Substa 26. I therefore urge you to approach this agenda item in this context and to limit your interventions to how we can complement the current programs of work and available, and focusing in how best to use them to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. So I open the floor for your views on item 3C. And I start with Canada, followed by Finland and Namibia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Indeed, we're very supportive of and eager to analyze and reflect in a very timely manner on how to better align the work of the CBD with the Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. It's already close to the end of 2023, and all of us as parties urgently need guidance as we update our MBSAPs and we start to implement them. In this regard, we'd like to thank the Secretariat for its efforts to get this work started. It is of utmost importance and a high priority from COP15. We agreed at COP15 that the Kunming to Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is the strategic plan of the CBD to 2030 and should drive and refocus all of the CBD's work as needed. Slow progress on many of the Aichi targets has made it clear to us that the status quo has not been good enough. We need to do better this time. This agenda item gives us an opportunity to start focusing on how to better align all of the CBD's work to the KMGBF. Unfortunately, we do not feel that the document before us today or its recommendations accomplishes this. But we are eager to work with all of our colleagues here over the next few days in the spirit of COP15 to find a way to accomplish this overall goal. In this regard, Canada will be looking for three things in the Substa recommendation. First of all, the completion of a comprehensive analysis of what gaps and possible redundancies exist when comparing all existing CBD guidance, guidelines, and tools, as well as guidance, guidelines, and tools from other relevant organizations and processes to the KMGBF and its 23 targets, and not to only focus on the CBD's old programs of work. Secondly, the identification of and early action on the most critical gaps where limited guidance exists before COP16 where feasible. For example, even the limited rapid assessment before us today concludes that there is a major gap on the implementation of Target 7 on biodiversity and pollution, just as one example. If parties agree here, should the CBD not be enabled to quickly start its work to fill this gap and not wait until COP16? And thirdly and lastly, highlight to other CBD bodies such as Subsidiary-26, SBI-4, the Bureau, and even COP16, the connections of our discussions here under this agenda item with upcoming discussions on the CBD's organization of work, multi-year program of work, programs of work, agendas, secretariat organization, and its budget. This will help us to continue to push for better alignment of the CBD with the priorities of parties as decided in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We will, of course, provide specific suggestions for textual changes to the draft SBSTTA-25 recommendations via email and look forward to further discussions either in a contact group or in the context of a CRP. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can please send your comments to the Secretariat to take into account? Finland. Now I give the floor to Finland, followed by Namibia and Mexico.
Thank you, Chair. Finland thanks the Secretariat for this document, SBSTTA-25/4, including the analysis. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework will require robust implementation, and the programs of work play an important role in guiding the implementation of the targets of the GBF. It's crucial that the Global Biodiversity Framework is implemented at all levels, galvanizing action by governments and throughout the UN system, without and across all levels and sectors and all of society, including the private sector and different stakeholders and IPLCs. To this end, the programs of work are important tools and means for both mainstreaming and implementing biodiversity across all sectors of society and to support parties in implementation. Finland recommends that the program of work have clear objectives that are aligned with the GBF, including activities, updates, timelines, and helping parties and sectors to make progress. And as Canada mentioned, the existing CBD guidance documents needs to be looked at, that their status and their availability instead of duplicating work. Different sectors need different precise proposals on the KMF. Also, the work by other international organizations and processes are important, including the biodiversity-related conventions, the Rio Convention, and they should be fully used. The Bern process is important to strengthen our synergies and to raise our knowledge on implementation. We have also to make use and maximize the co-benefits of the outcomes of the Article 8J work program on indigenous people and local communities. Our additions to the recommendation, which is quite many, by the way, is submitted to the Secretariat. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Finland. I'll give the floor to Namibia, followed by Mexico y Colombia.
Thank you, Chair. Namibia is making this submission on behalf of the African region. Africa would like to commend the efforts made by the Executive Secretary for conducting a rapid analysis of the program of work, including the thematic programs covering the major biomes on the planet, as well as the programs addressing the cross-cutting issues. Africa wish to reiterate paragraph 3 of decision 15/4. Chair, the rapid assessment analysis conducted does not fully address the request made by the Conference of Parties, and those request SBSTTA-25 to defer discussions under this item to its 26th SBSTTA meeting to allow the Secretariat to complete the analysis which give us detailed gaps. of the current programs of work with the Convention. As we deliberate on the approaches to identify scientific and technical needs for the implementation of this framework, we acknowledge the importance of aligning our efforts with the goals and aspirations set forth in the framework. Our continent, Africa, hosts a wealth of biodiversity, and effective implementation of the framework holds profound significance for our shared global future. Additionally, we would like to encourage the Secretariat to consider reviewing other relevant documents, in particular the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification on Land Degradation Neutrality. Land degradation neutrality in this area is a critical issue that affects both biodiversity and human well-being. To achieve the goals of the Kunming-Montreal GBIF, we must integrate strategies for land restorations, sustainable land management, and land degradation neutrality into our programs of work, especially in dryland regions. In addition, Africa would like to emphasize the needs for connectivity of marine protected area and marine OEACMs as one of the areas requiring further guidance to assist parties in implementing Target 3 of the GBIF. Guidance in this regard will be instrumental in enhancing our efforts to protect and restore biodiversity in these fragile ecosystems. In conclusion, Africa proposed the inclusion of indigenous people and local communities across all programs of work, as they are the holders of traditional knowledge associated with the biomes they reside in and manage. Thus, we propose the addition of point L under paragraph 3, guidance on inclusion of IPLC across all programs of work, and also under paragraph 3b, we propose to include at the end of the sentence and dryland landscapes. We'll submit our contributions in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Namibia, on behalf of the African states. Ahora doy la palabra a México, seguido de Colombia, España y Turquía.
Gracias, señor presidente. La delegación mexicana considera que ante la urgencia de tener resultados para el 2030 en la implementación del marco mundial, se requiere de todos los esfuerzos posibles. Por lo tanto, es importante enfocarnos en alinear los programas de trabajo del convenio y del marco Kunming-Montreal, tal como ya lo mencionó el distinguido delegado de Canadá, y como lo indica la recomendación, que el secretariado realice las actividades necesarias para cubrir los vacíos identificados. Vemos muchas coincidencias con las intervenciones anteriores, como los vínculos entre los acuerdos relacionados, principalmente las convenciones de Río, recordando el convenio de certificación que mencionó el colega que nos presidió. Finalmente, deseamos manifestar nuestro compromiso para participar y apoyar los trabajos de alineación de estos programas, así como para subsanar los vacíos de información identificados. Y con esto terminamos esta intervención para dar paso a los demás y poder cumplir con el mandato que usted nos dé. Gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias, México. Creo que es importante tomar en cuenta que desde el año 2010 que se adoptó el marco mundial y las metas de Aichi, los programas de trabajo existentes no han sido modificados ni revisados. Y abrir un espacio para cambiarlos todos es extremadamente complicado. Aquí lo importante del gap análisis que hizo la Secretaría y que fue a solicitud de la mesa del Bureau fue analizar justamente esos huecos y ver la manera en que se puede alinear todo lo que ya existe en los diferentes programas para alinearse con el nuevo plan estratégico. Entonces, la opción no es abrir los programas de trabajo, sino encontrar esa orientación para hacer los ajustes necesarios en el marco de lo que ya tenemos en el convenio. Creo que es importante debemos de concentrar nuestra energía a cumplir con las metas que tenemos ahora en este nuevo marco y donde tenemos muy poco tiempo para avanzar. Doy la palabra a Colombia, seguido de España y Turquía.
Gracias, señor presidente. Con respecto al tema 3C, la delegación de Colombia tiene las siguientes consideraciones. Si bien la elaboración de proyectos de actualizaciones de estos programas de trabajo pasa por identificar las lagunas de los temas que estos no tratan, el análisis también pasa por alto una revisión de los asuntos inherentes a cada programa que deben ser revisados para ser actualizados, como es el caso de metas cualitativas o cuantitativas inferiores a la ambición del marco post-2020 y el establecimiento de horizontes temporales que ya están vencidos. Más aún, es probable que haya conceptos y áreas de trabajo en las temáticas de cada programa de trabajo que requieren ser revisados debido a los avances científicos y técnicos de la última década. En este sentido, el documento debe incluir una mención a este análisis que hizo falta y dejar explícito el cómo ha de llevarse a cabo para el SBSTA 26. Estaríamos de acuerdo con que el SBSTA 25 se limite al análisis de lagunas presentado en el apartado 4 de conclusiones, sí, solo si hay claridades de cómo completar el trabajo planteado en la decisión 15/4, párrafo 9, de elaborar proyectos de actualizaciones de estos programas de trabajo, una ruta de trabajo que debe incluir el análisis de marcos temporales, metas cuantitativas, metas cualitativas, conceptos y áreas de trabajo de cara a los avances de estos campos del marco Kunming-Montreal. Específicamente en el párrafo 1, Colombia considera que se debe incluir referencias a soluciones basadas en la naturaleza y el enfoque de una salud y respecto a acceso a recursos genéticos y participación justa y equitativa en los beneficios que se deriven de su utilización, es decir, la inclusión de los recursos genéticos y sus productos derivados. En el párrafo 17 sugerimos agregar producción sostenible y referencia a juventudes y niños con enfoque intergeneracional. En el párrafo 20 se recomienda revisar los programas de trabajo para actualizar sus metas cuantitativas y cualitativas que estén obsoletas. En el punto 4 del documento se sugiere incluir en el punto 1 que es necesario generar espacios de articulación con diferentes actores a distintos niveles. Debemos hacer uso de las plataformas que existen, el CHM, el NBSAP Accelerator Partnership, de ARF, el foro de la NBSAP, para informar constantemente sobre los programas de trabajo con el fin de generar comunidades de práctica. En el punto 4 se debe incluir el análisis de las lagunas, pero sumar también el análisis de la actualización de estos planes de trabajo. Los comentarios detallados se adjuntan para consideración de la Secretaría. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias, Colombia. Por favor, si hace llegar sus sugerencias. Recordemos que este documento ha descrito el proceso de cómo se hizo el análisis y Colombia acaba de decir, está de acuerdo en que tomemos como base la identificación de los vacíos más importantes, pero también veamos que el documento tiene recomendaciones para que la Secretaría continúe trabajando en esto y haga una propuesta más concreta de cómo seguir adelante para el próximo SBSTA. Creo que ese es donde nos encontramos. Así es que mucho agradeceremos que podemos afinar en esa recomendación para que la Secretaría trabaje en este periodo de aquí al próximo SBSTA. Ahora doy la palabra a España, seguido de Turquía y Japón.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. España está de acuerdo con el enfoque gradual o por pasos que acaba de explicar, propuesto para abordar las lagunas en la orientación científica y técnica para la aplicación de las metas del marco, a fin de poder valorar la posible actualización de los programas de trabajo pertinentes cuando sea necesario y de forma priorizada y teniendo en cuenta las necesidades previamente identificadas. Reconocemos la importancia de los programas del trabajo del convenio para la consecución de los objetivos y metas del marco mundial, pero también consideramos fundamentales en este sentido otras formas de orientación, tanto a través de las decisiones de la COP como en otros ámbitos de trabajo del convenio y sus protocolos. Proponemos, por tanto, que la Secretaría realice un análisis rápido adicional de las posibles carencias generales, teniendo en cuenta también esas cuestiones transversales. Proponemos algunas enmiendas para que en este proceso gradual se recaben las opiniones de una gama amplia de agentes relevantes, como los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, los convenios relacionados con la biodiversidad, los convenios de Río y otros acuerdos multilaterales relevantes, incluyendo IPBES e IPCC. España es consciente de que existen varias peticiones para el desarrollo de orientaciones en otros proyectos de decisión y consideramos que sería útil obtener una visión general de todas ellas en un documento previo al SBI 4 o 5, para poder priorizar la elaboración de orientaciones adicionales o la actualización de las existentes, teniendo en cuenta la disponibilidad de recursos. Deseamos también destacar la necesidad de cooperación del CBD con otros acuerdos ambientales multilaterales y otros actores, por lo que sugerimos incluir una referencia explícita al proceso de Berna. Finalmente, España sugiere que se establezca un proceso mediante el cual SBSTA y la COP puedan incorporar a la futura solicitud de IPBES sobre elementos adicionales a su programa de trabajo hasta 2030 y que se considere la relación entre el IPBES y el CBD en consonancia con la decisión de IPBES 10 sobre la aplicación de su programa de trabajo renovable. Hemos enviado por escrito a la Secretaría nuestras sugerencias de texto. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, España. Ahora doy la palabra a Turquía, seguido de Japón y el Reino Unido.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We appreciate the analysis of the programs of work and identification of areas that require attention in order to align with the ambitious targets set by the framework. It's important to accept the gaps not only give rise to challenges, but also provide opportunities for innovation and collaboration. We acknowledge that identifying gaps through analysis is an initial step. We also support the recommendations outlined in the document. We want to emphasize our support for the importance of involving all stakeholders throughout the process, including society and the private sector. We need to continue integrating biodiversity considerations into sectors and policies in order to align them with sustainable development goals and other related areas and multilateral environmental agreements. This entails fostering collaboration and coordination across sectors such as agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and urban planning. By adopting integrated approaches across these areas, we can achieve development effectively. Their participation strengthens our efforts and ensures that diverse perspectives are taken into account. Also, it is crucial to incorporate gender approaches and policies into our efforts. Additionally, through the analysis of the programs of work, adopting advancements and innovation in biodiversity conservation is important. Utilizing tools like sensing and big data analysis can greatly enhance our monitoring, research, and decision-making processes, considering analysis of the programs of work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Turkey. Now I'll give the floor to Japan, followed by UK and South Africa.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Japan joins previous speakers and express its appreciation for the efforts made by the Secretariat to conduct rapid analysis of the program of work based on the COP15 decision. Although Japan understands that the rapid analysis is not exhaustive, but the analysis was very useful to identify the gaps and the inconsistencies with the current work at CBD, and they may require significant revisions. On the other hand, as Spain already pointed out, we should be mindful that there has been other relevant guidance developed other than the CBD program of work since the development of the 8th program of works, for example. We should also be mindful that only very limited time is remaining for the implementation of the ambitious GBF. We should promptly update and implement the NBSAPs aligned with the GBF. Therefore, Japan considers it will be critical to make focused and coordinated efforts to update existing guidance or establish new programs should be kept to a minimum, and they should be limited to something which is necessary to support the implementation of the GBF and achieve targets and goals in each country as it was mentioned by Canada and Finland. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Japan. So I've been listening that the recognition of the work done by the Secretariat identifying gaps, but also the need to continue to consider existing guidance inside the Convention and outside by other partners, inclusiveness of other sectors, other stakeholders in the way to move forward. I hope this can be properly reflected on the recommendations. Now I'll give the floor to the UK, followed by South Africa and the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The UK would like to thank the Secretariat for the work they have done so far on the rapid analysis of the existing guidance available to support parties implement the KMGBF. This is a hugely important task and one that needs to be given a higher level of priority so that future decisions that may affect the programmes of work and Secretariat activities can be properly informed. We have three overarching points to make. First, we agree with Canada that, as agreed at COP15, the KMGBF is the strategic plan for implementation to 2030, and as such, all activities of the Convention should be aligned with it. This is an opportunity to refocus our priorities and to cut back on any areas that are no longer required. That's not to say we need a lengthy review of the Convention's work history, but there is a balance to be made between assessing what we already have in place and what is needed rapidly to support implementation. Second, we note that the work done so far is partial. If SBSTA is to make effective recommendations to COP16, we need to give the Secretariat a clearer steer on what is required in the second phase of their analysis. This should go beyond identifying gaps in guidance produced under the existing work programmes and consider what new elements may be needed. And finally, I'd like to support the views expressed by Spain. We fully support drawing on the efforts of other organisations to fill the gaps. And in this regard, we would like to see specific proposals on how the assessments produced by IPBES could provide an avenue to generate relevant scientific or technical advice for discussion at SBSTA 26. This would in turn help to inform IPBES 12 in 2025 in deciding on its future assessments. We would also like to see a reference to the role of the Edinburgh process in filling gaps at the sub-national level. We have submitted some short proposals to the Secretariat to reflect these final points. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. Now I'll give the floor to South Africa, followed by Russian Federation and Brazil.
Thank you, Chair. South Africa supports the statement made by Namibia on behalf of Africa. We also wish to thank the Executive Secretary for the review. We, however, would like to request a more in-depth review of all existing tools that can support parties to implement the GBF targets. We'd like to propose the establishment of a working group to compile the required guidance to support parties in the implementation of all the GBF targets. The group could also be tasked with the review of all guidance material available rather than only the existing programs of work, followed by collating the most useful resources for parties in a common repository with easy access. This working group could also identify gaps and scope of work required to address these gaps. South Africa would also like to note that one of the findings in the document SBSTA-25/4 is the need for a robust guidance on biodiversity inclusive spatial planning on land. South Africa has already worked on substantial guidance on how to undertake biodiversity inclusive planning on land with UNEP WCMC, funded by the Japanese Biodiversity Fund, in the series Mapping Biodiversity Priorities and Mainstreaming Biodiversity Priorities. We are currently updating this guidance and thus do not see the need for a full program of work. We also would like to draw the attention of parties to the work undertaken by the IUCN and its partners over the past 2 years to prepare detailed technical guidance to implement all the GBF targets for species conservation. The Global Species Action Plan should be reviewed by the recommended working group, and it could be listed as one of the valuable sources of support to parties. Regarding the overarching gaps, in addition to those that are in the document, South Africa would also like to echo the suggestion made by Namibia as part of the Africa statement that the inclusion of the following concerning the implementation of Target 3 of the GBF, connectivity of marine protected areas and marine OECMs. The motivation for this is that connectivity is one of the qualitative elements of Target 3, but we realize that there is considerably less understanding of ecological connectivity in marine compared with terrestrial areas and how to measure it in systems of marine conservation areas. A better understanding is essential for the design of marine conservation areas and systems of marine conservation areas, especially considering the potential relevance of this element for climate change resilience. Thank you.
Thank you, South Africa. We still have a long list of speakers. Let's move on. I'll give the floor to the Russian Federation, followed by Brazil and Switzerland.
Спасибо, господин председатель. Я постараюсь коротко, потому что многие пункты, которые мы бы хотели озвучить, они были уже озвучены другими делегациями, прежде всего Мексики, Намибии, Канады, Японии. Мы согласны во многом с их пунктами. Хотел бы выразить также благодарность секретариату за то, что секретариат в короткие сроки сделал этот экспресс-анализ существующих многочисленных рабочих программ Конвенции. Мы по-прежнему верим в эти программы работ Конвенции и полагаем, что они были и должны оставаться ключевыми инструментами реализации целей и задач Конвенции, а значит и глобальной рамочной программы. Все мы коллективно с вами вложили много труда, усилий и времени в их разработку и выполнение. Поэтому будем приветствовать дальнейший более детальный анализ, как отметил целый ряд стран, на основе задач глобальной рамочной программы и начало работы по закрытию ключевых выявленных пробелов, а также рекомендации по возможной целесообразности при необходимости разработки новых или обновления действующих программ на основе выявленных пробелов. В целом поддерживаем проект рекомендаций и поддерживаем предложение в параграфе 4 по организации дальнейшей работы, но включая дальнейший анализ всех имеющихся инструментов и не только тех пробелов, которые сегодня мы видим в документе, как отмечали другие страны. Спасибо, господин председатель.
Thank you, Russian Federation. Now I'll give the floor to Brazil, followed by Switzerland and Germany.
Thank you, Chair. We take note of the rapid analysis on overarching gaps prepared by the Secretariat in order to align the programs of work of the Convention with the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. At the same time, we would like to express our concern regarding the potential implications of introducing 11 new work streams within the Convention. This is a significantly high number of working areas, which may pose additional challenges to developing country delegations, which often struggle to revise all relevant working and information documents. Furthermore, we understand that prior to identifying the need for additional guidance on specific topics, it would be helpful to map and assess the availability of relevant materials across other multilateral environmental agreements and processes to avoid duplication of efforts in line with Decision 15-3. In this regard, we would draw attention to paragraphs 3.E on pollution and 3.J on sustainable consumption, both of which are addressed under specific multilateral processes, such as the BRS conventions, the Global Framework on Chemicals, and the SDG Monitoring Framework for SDG 12, respectively. We would further stress that any additional guidance must maintain coherence with the agreed language under the goals and targets of the KM-GBF. In this regard, we struggle to understand the reference to biome-specific implications under paragraph 3.J, which is not referred to under Target 16. In light of those concerns, we would see an added value in a more strategic approach in order to identify key priorities that would benefit from further work. We would therefore favor enhanced work in issues related to biodiversity inclusive land use planning, as proposed under 3.A, marine, coastal, and inland water ecosystems, which have often been underrepresented under CBD discussions, and in issues related to groups in vulnerable situations, in particularly paragraphs 3.F on biodiversity-based products and 3.K on gender considerations. We would encourage the CBD Secretariat to revise their analysis in order to identify which new areas of work related to the 23 targets of the coming Montreal GBF are not already covered by existing programs of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Brazil. And also to remind the importance of consistency in the language with goals and targets. Now I'll give the floor to Switzerland, followed by Germany and New Zealand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. After the adoption of the KMGBF last year, we agree with Canada, the UK and others that there is a need to focus our activities on efficient and effective implementation of the GBF. And for this, we should align our efforts under the CBD and under the other biodiversity-related conventions with the goals and targets of the GBF. In the view of Switzerland, it therefore makes sense to analyze potential gaps and possible duplications in the existing guidances to parties in a comprehensive way and beyond the programs of work of the CBD. Mr. Chair, the proposed rapid analysis under this item is a useful first step, but we consider that more has to be done. As mentioned by Canada and others, Switzerland is of the view that we need a comprehensive overview of all the existing work programs, action plans, guidances that are valuable for the implementation of the KMGBF. As the framework is a framework for all, including for all other MEAs, we consider it to be important that this work should be done in consultation with the biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant multilateral agreements. As mentioned by Finland and Spain, the Bern process, and in particular the Bern III Conference on Cooperation among Biodiversity-related Conventions for the implementation of the GBF, is well placed to contribute to putting together a comprehensive overview on all relevant existing guidances developed under the biodiversity-related conventions and other relevant multilateral agreements. We will send our suggested changes for the paragraphs 4 and 5 of the proposed recommendations under this item in writing. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Now I'll give the floor to Germany, followed by New Zealand and the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Germany is of the view that the Convention should make full use of the knowledge assessed by IPPES. As mentioned before, IPPES will play an important role under Agenda Item 3B, the Global Review. Also, approved IPPES products and their impacts for the Convention are reflected under Agenda Item 4. Germany highly welcomes these three assessments and again would like to thank the authors for the outstanding scientific work, incredible dedication and efforts to realize these. However, since there is no forward-looking recommendation for COP16 regarding IPPES, we suggest to deal with this under this agenda item 3C. Germany is of the view that the CBD should elaborate on future requests for the IPPES rolling work program up to 2030 and potentially beyond. Parties of the CBD may also wish to reflect whether it might be good to have a sub-agenda item dedicated to IPPES in the future that covers both the reflection of approved deliverables and forward-looking recommendations for the future work of IPPES. We will hand in our text proposal in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Germany. Now I'll give the floor to Switzerland, followed by European Union and Belgium.
Speaking for New Zealand, Aotearoa New Zealand considers alignment of the CBD's work program with supporting implementation of the GBF as an important process that is deserving adequate attention. We agree with the views raised by Canada and others on the limitations of the work presented here, and that we should consider how this could be done more comprehensively than is possible based on the rapid assessment we have before us. A more thorough realignment process against the GBF could identify other opportunities for streamlining or efficiencies amongst CBD work programs, as well as the way we work. We note, for example, some similar work has been undertaken within the context of the Sustainable Wildlife Management agenda item, and query whether it makes sense to integrate consideration of potential areas for complementary guidance identified there within a more comprehensive process. We're also mindful that while it is important this work includes efficiencies and coordination across MEAs, many organisations and processes outside the MEA system hold important mandates for managing sectors with responsibilities related to the drivers of biodiversity loss. For guidance and tools to support implementation of the GBF to hold the necessary weight and influence within these organisations, we could consider tasking the Secretariat with exploring opportunities for joint initiatives or collaboration mechanisms for work in areas of mutual interest and priority. Finally, in delivering this work, we consider we should be seeking the views and contributions of representatives of Indigenous peoples and local communities, and would support reflecting this in our recommendations. This work should also take into consideration the contribution of different knowledge systems, including traditional knowledge, noting the relevance of these for many, if not all, targets. We would be keen to work alongside the other delegations on possible revisions to the recommendations on this agenda item, and we'll be happy to provide text on our more specific suggestions to the Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. And I'll give the floor to EU, followed by Belgium and Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The European Union would like to thank the CBD Secretariat for the rapid assessment of gaps, which is useful as a first step. We support the proposed request to the CBD Secretariat to seek views on how to address the gaps. This complements the original request in the COP15 decision for a strategic review and analysis of the program of work, which hasn't yet been completed. For the European Union, two key questions remain. Which of the identified scientific gaps and lack of guidance are crucial for ensuring the full implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework, and how to fill these gaps? For many elements of the goals and targets, the problem may reside elsewhere, such as lack of funding, capacity building on knowledge, limited political support for implementation, etc. Guidance is just one of the tools we have and not necessarily the strongest tool. We need a broader assessment of the bottlenecks for implementation to prioritize the work under the Convention, including, but not only, on what could usefully be done under the revised work programs. We look forward to discuss this at the 4th meeting of SBI. We support the changes proposed in the draft recommendation from the Ville report and will provide them in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, EU. Now I'll give the floor to Belgium, Argentina, and 164, which is South Sudan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Belgium agrees with the interventions from several parties, such as Canada, Finland, Namibia, Spain, and many others, to not just do a rapid analysis of the gaps on the programs of work mentioned in the document SBSTTA-25/4, but also on the other cross-cutting programs of work of the Convention. We also agree with them on the importance to work together with other MEAs in this effect, among which through the Bern process, as well as with international organizations, as mentioned by New Zealand. As mentioned by Spain, there may be future CBD decisions that might ask for the development of guidance or updating of existing guidance, as we already see in document SBSTTA-25/12. We agree that there should be an additional paragraph requesting the Secretariat to compile a full list of requests for the developing or updating of guidance for COP16 in order to be able to prioritize the development and updating of guidance, taking into account gaps and the availability of resources. We will submit our proposals in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Belgium. Ahora doy la palabra a Argentina, seguido de South Sudan y Costa Rica.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. La Argentina concuerda con la importancia de los programas de trabajo del Convenio sobre Diversidad Biológica, así como de las decisiones conexas de la Conferencia de las Partes y otras esferas de trabajo en el contexto del convenio, para apoyar el logro de los objetivos y metas del Marco Mundial de Biodiversidad de Kunming-Montreal, y agradece a la Secretaría la elaboración del análisis rápido de los programas de trabajo del convenio en relación con los objetivos del marco. La Argentina considera importante identificar las lagunas generales de los programas de trabajo del convenio y apoya particularmente la orientación sobre actividades, productos y servicios sostenibles basados en la biodiversidad, Meta 9, y la orientación para abordar las consideraciones de género en el contexto de diversos biomas y cuestiones temáticas, Meta 23. La Argentina considera que la movilización de recursos constituye una condición fundamental para la implementación del marco y un tema transversal en los programas de trabajo. Por este motivo, y teniendo en cuenta el análisis rápido de los programas de trabajo, sugiere la inclusión en el listado de lagunas generales del ítem Orientación sobre movilización de recursos para determinados biomas y cuestiones temáticas, Meta 19. La Argentina estima necesario evitar sobrecargar las deliberaciones y duplicar el trabajo en relación con otros acuerdos multilaterales con un mandato más directo sobre los temas. Por este motivo, sugiere reducir el listado mencionado, eliminando los ítems 3C, 3I, 3J del proyecto de recomendaciones. Asimismo, la Argentina toma nota de la intención de invitar a organizaciones internacionales pertinentes a que contribuyan a la labor y sugiere realizar una compilación de los resultados para consideración del SBSTTA-25. Por último, la Argentina considera que la actualización de programas de trabajo debería tener en cuenta las prioridades nacionales, capacidades y necesidades de las partes, teniendo en cuenta su legislación nacional. Hemos remitido por escrito nuestras propuestas de modificación. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Argentina. Ahora doy la palabra a South Sudan, seguido de Costa Rica y Kenia.
Thank you, Chair. South Sudan aligned itself with the statement made by Namibia on behalf of Africa and applauds the work of the Secretariat. Looking at the recommendations made and the important role to be played by the program of work of the Convention in guiding the implementation of the GBF, efforts should be exerted to have a thorough and complete analysis of the gaps within each program of work to guide parties in implementing the GBF. South Sudan supports the request to allow more time for the Secretariat to complete analysis through the proposed intersessional work on the individual programs of work, which is expected to give detailed gaps in the current program of work of the conventions and how best to address the gaps by involving the state and non-state actors to better implement the GBF. Lastly, Chair, in conducting the intersessional work and consultations on the individual programs, technological challenges, especially with the online platform, should be considered and managed through blended mode of interactions, including face-to-face meetings, depending on availability of resources. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, South Sudan. I'll give the floor to Costa Rica, followed by Kenya and Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Costa Rica appreciates the review carried out by the Secretariat, but within a greater depth and guidance is definitely required. And as it has been mentioned by Canada and other countries, we believe that is necessary an exhaustive review of agendas, work programs, budgets, and even a review of human resources arrangements. It seems to us that there are work programs that require particular analysis since they were agreed upon under another historical context. This review of the Convention's programs is necessary not only for a coming Montreal strategic framework, but for the CBD to fully adjust to the new biodiversity threats and technology opportunities. We are not sure to use the term gaps in the document because it means that there is no technical information. We prefer to use another terms as integration spaces or something like that because we are not sure that there is no information in those gaps. The document requires to be reviewed from different approach to have an adequate recommendation for COP15, and Costa Rica is willing to participate in the analysis of the document. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Costa Rica. Doy la palabra a Kenia, seguida de Bosnia, Herzegovina y Australia.
Thank you, Chair. Kenya aligns with Namibia's position on behalf of African states and also agrees with other parties that there are gaps relating to main elements of certain targets, and we specifically want to highlight Target 3, which may be addressed by revising and updating existing guidance documents. A case in point is Decision 14.8 Annex 2 on guidance on effective and equitable governance for protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. The rapid analysis did not reference this existing guidance that was developed for Aichi Target 11. While the existing guidance may not be adequate for the GBF, the existence of such guidance needs to be noted and where needed, revised, updated, and as appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Bosnia-Herzegovina, followed by Australia and FAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bosnia and Herzegovina welcomes the work of the Secretariat on the rapid analysis to identify scientific and technical needs of parties for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal framework. All provided findings in the document are highly informative, which is why we generally support proposed guidance. According to the available guidance and decisions, it is clear that CBD has well-established foundations for the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. However, we would like to reiterate that the Kunming-Montreal Framework in the Section C lists a number of approaches that should be considered in implementing the framework. Going back to the detailed discussions on this issue, we believe that now is the right time to also consider elements in the Section C of the framework. We notice that the current work programs, existing decisions, as well as the work of the other multilateral bodies do not contain enough guidance for two approaches in the implementation of the framework, namely all of the government and all of the society approach, and the second, formal and informal education. We are aware that the mainstreaming is one part of the all of the government approach, but we believe it is not completely covered. However, mainstreaming is not a part of all of society approach. We believe it is necessary to better support parties in integrated approach of a society in the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework at the national level. From other side, although we all understand that education is one of rare long-term tools for achievement of living in harmony with nature, we believe that less attention and support is given to despite the work of this convention. Therefore, we suggest to add guidance for all of government and all of a society approach and formal and informal education to the list in document. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to Australia, followed by FAO and NGOs 239.
Thank you, Chair. Parties agreed at COP15 that the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework should be used as the strategic plan for the implementation of the Convention and its protocols, its bodies and its secretariat over the period of 2022 to 2030. And the framework should be used to better align and direct the work of the various bodies of the Convention and its protocols and its budget according to the goals and targets of the framework. In agreeing to the KMGBF, parties acknowledge that we should no longer continue with business as usual. We need to do more. This includes at home through our national and regional efforts, but it also needs to be through the efforts when we come together under the Convention. We need to assess the Convention's current effort and operations against the framework beyond the current rapid assessment to determine where there is sufficient guidance and support and where there are gaps to guide how we need to realign, refocus and adapt our collective efforts to support the framework's implementation. We recognise, as others have mentioned today, that there are elements of the framework which have been underrepresented in our efforts to date. Australia, like Canada, Finland, Japan, Switzerland, and many others, consider a more comprehensive analysis would support this pursuit. Starting with the framework as the strategic plan and comparing this against the full suite of current CBD guidance, guidelines and tools, but also others available from other relevant fora to clearly identify where there are gaps to be filled, where there are opportunities to realign work, leverage the efforts of others to reduce duplication, and perhaps where work is no longer needed, thereby freeing up resources to focus on priority areas, noting that resources are not limitless. That way we can focus our efforts on where they can best be used to support effective KM-GBF implementation. To this end, Australia supports the proposed text amendments put forward by Canada. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Australia. I now give the floor to Malawi. So I have a party, followed by FAO.
Thank you, Chair. Malawi thanks the Secretariat for the document indicating the rapid assessment of the guidance documents under the program of works that exist and their gaps. Malawi supports the statement made by Namibia on behalf of the African group. The rapid analysis has been very informative. For some of the guidance documents that did not undergo rapid review of the guidance document outlined in Para 11, like guidance document for targets 13, 17, and 20, among others, it would have been useful not just to take note of their existence, but also to assess their sufficiency and appropriateness to the GBF. That is why we welcome paragraph 4 of the draft recommendation, but that the intersessional work should also consider the reviewing the sufficiency, effectiveness, and appropriateness to the GBF of the existing guidance document. We recognize that although the guidance document may not be available under the CBD, related guidance document could be available elsewhere in other multilateral processes, and hence we would like to support paragraph 5 of the draft recommendation in this regard. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Malawi. Now I'll give the floor to FAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This statement refers to paragraph 19 of document 25/4, where it is mentioned that guidance produced by international organizations could help to address some of the gaps noted in the document. To support the implementation of its mandate to end hunger and malnutrition across the globe through sustainable agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and aquaculture, FAO has developed numerous forms of guidance that are relevant to many of the targets of the KM-GBF. More than half of the targets of the framework are directly related to agri-food sectors in one way or another. There's policy and technical tools that are available to support country efforts to implement the frameworks, include standards, guidelines, accounting and monitoring tools, code of conduct, and other normative instruments. FAO will soon launch, before the end of the year, its Biodiversity Knowledge Hub to facilitate access to more than 300 tools and instruments that are relevant to one or more targets of the framework. As the framework cannot be achieved without the active engagement of the agri-food sector, FAO will continue to support countries to fill the gaps related to agri-food system in the update and implementation of the NBSAPs. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, FAO. So we are looking as a first stop the gaps in the gap analysis. We're looking inside the convention what we have, and also we're looking outside the convention what is useful around to help us to fill these gaps. Thank you, FAO. And now to finish with observers, and we have very limited time and decide how to go. I will give the floor to IUCN, followed by IPLCs and Ramsar.
Thank you, Chair.
IUCN supports the proposed approach for updating, as practically needed and in a strategic manner, the programs of work of the Convention. IUCN recommends that if updated, the programs of work establish clear objectives aligned with the GBF, include concrete activities, updated timelines, and periodic revisions of progress. This exercise should support GBF implementation, not delay action. As many parties, IUCN strongly supports inviting inputs from relevant international organizations and other stakeholders to identify and address gaps in the programs of work, to, among others, avoid duplication and leverage synergies. IUCN stands ready to actively engage in this effort. Chair, in the absence of a dedicated program of work on species conservation and given the weak progress on Aichi Target 12, IUCN invites parties to use the Global Species Action Plan as key guidance to integrate species conservation across the GBF and enhance implementation of species-related targets, as already mentioned by South Africa. The GSAP has been developed by IUCN, its members, commissions, and partners in consultation with the secretariats of the biodiversity-related conventions, and sets out key strategic interventions and actions for the conservation and sustainable use of species in all GBF targets. Gracias, Presidente.
Muchas gracias. Ahora doy la palabra al representante de IPLCs. Microphone to yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This statement is made on behalf of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. The IFB notes that the rapid analysis did not identify all gaps and support the need for additional analysis in the future. The IFB would like to highlight that there is an upcoming meeting of the Ad Hoc Working Group on Article 8J and related provisions in November 2023, and recommendations arising from there will be useful in the continuing gap analysis. In regards to the current assessment of gaps and needs, we have additional suggestions for guidances. Our specific text suggestions is as follows. In paragraph 3, to insert the words including those after the word gaps, and to add to the list of guidances suggested the following. First, guidance on respect for the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities and on equitable governance, which is relevant to Target 3. Next, guidance on the application of a human rights-based approach to biodiversity policy and actions, which is relevant to all targets. And last, guidance on assessing the role of collective actions and non-market-based approaches to resource mobilization, which is relevant to Target 19. In paragraph 4, we would like to insert including indigenous peoples and local communities after the word stakeholders. Furthermore, we would also like to support the proposal by Namibia on behalf of Africa countries in engaging or including IPLCs across all programs of work. We ask for party support for our proposals. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, representative of IPLCs. So I would like to know if there are parties supporting the language suggested by the representative of IPLCs. I see some hands. Thank you very much. There is support. Now I'll give the floor to Ramsar.
Thank you, Chair. The Secretariat of the Convention on Wetlands welcomes the initial rapid analysis of CBD programs of work with respect to the targets of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework contained in document 25 INF 1. We note the proposed approach to intersessional work on the individual programs of work presented in document 25-4, as well as the many suggestions by parties raised in interventions under this agenda item. As lead partner on wetlands for the CBD, we stand ready to co-lead with the CBD Secretariat efforts in relation to the program of work on inland waters biodiversity and to contribute towards other programs of work where relevant, including, of course, the program of work on marine and coastal biodiversity. In this context, I also note that with the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the Secretariats of the CBD and the Convention on Wetlands continue preparation of their 6th joint work plan in line with decisions of governing bodies of both conventions and building on the review of the 5th joint work plan conducted in 2021. The final joint work plan will be presented to the SBI meeting in May 2024 and the Conventional Wetlands Standing Committee at its meeting in June 2024. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ramsars. Now I'll give the floor to Representative of Women, 270.
Thanks, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of the UNCBD Women's Caucus. We welcome the recognition that there is a need for guidance on addressing gender considerations in the context of various biomes and thematic issues. But those are not the only elements that should be addressed in order to provide parties with enough elements, tools, and information to implement Target 23 fully and the Gender Plan of Action, which should be noted was not included in this rapid review. We recommend that scientific and technical input on other gaps of knowledge, capacity, and data regarding gender dynamics beyond just agriculture, protected areas, or biomes should be integrated into the guidance to be developed to address the overarching gaps mentioned in Para 17. Parties can greatly benefit from comprehensive guidance and support to ensure a more successful implementation of both Target 23 and the Gender Plan of Action. For that, the CBD Women's Caucus is in position to collaborate. Furthermore, Section C introduces new principles related to human rights-based approach and the right to a healthy environment, and there are several other innovative elements within the targets for which there is guidance and technical support that must be developed and provided. We encourage parties to put emphasis on closing these knowledge and capacity gaps to ease and strengthen their implementation of the Kunming Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll give the floor to NGO. It's 239.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking on behalf of a group of international NGOs. Species are fundamental units of biodiversity and the building blocks of ecosystems. To deliver for species will require dedicated resourcing, technical and financial, to support countries' implementation of the species-related actions. While species are included in the current programmes of work, this is piecemeal. To ensure coordinated action on species and to generate the momentum required to prevent extinctions and reduce extinction risk, we consider a species programme of work as an essential. We look to parties for their support for the consideration of this substantive programme of work. We have text suggestions which we will submit in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Can you give us an idea of what is the nature of this concrete text that you are suggesting? I'm referring to the previous speaker, so parties can have a more clear idea what is the type, because
Should I explain, Chair? Or is the other speaker?
It was intervention of international NGOs, right? The previous speaker, but says that we'll deliver a text with proposed amendments, but we need to have more clarity of what is exactly what you are suggesting so parties can be aware and if they are in the position to support, because it's not clear.
Thank you, Chair. The specific text relates to the recommendations in paragraph 4 and a new paragraph 6. So in paragraph 4, it would read, requests the Executive Secretary, building on the results of the rapid analysis, through notifications, online meetings, webinars, or online discussion forums subject to the availability of resources, comma instead of a full stop, including but not limited to how to address the gaps noted in paragraph 3 above, end, continue to the end of the paragraph that is. And then paragraph 6 would read, requests further consideration is given to ensure the full alignment of the current programmes of work in delivering the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework in a holistic manner and consider where new programmes of work could concretely add value to its implementation. So there's no specific text on a species programme of work as such, but just an opportunity to consider that such a programme or other programmes might be useful in the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I would like to know if, based on what you just heard, if there's any party supporting this suggestion. Please raise your hand. I don't see anyone. Thank you very much. I see one. Okay. You are supporting. It's Grenada. Now I'm going to give the floor to 176. It says reserve, but we know that it's Iraq. A party.
تحية طيبة. أولا قبل البدء أود التعبير عن شكر والامتنان للجهات المنظمة والمضيفة لهذا الحدث البيئي المهم فيما يخص نهج تحديد الاحتياجات العلمية والتقنية لدعم تنفيذ الإطار بما في ذلك آثار على برامج عمل اتفاقية يتطلب الأمر وباختصار شديد العمل على تحديد الثغرات التي تحد من مرونة عمل اتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي في ظل مخاطر الحروب والكوارث التي تزداد بشتى أصقاع العالم وتلقي بظلالها بالحد وإعاقة عمل الاتفاقيات الدولية في مجال تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة بشكل عام واتفاقية التنوع البيولوجي بشكل خاص وكذلك يتطلب الأمر تحليل متعدد ومعمق ودقيق قبل تعميم التجارب الناجحة والدروس المستفادة على أساس زيادة نقاط القوة والفرص والتقليل من نقاط الضعف والتهديدات وشكرا.
Thank you, Iraq. So with this, we close the deliberations on this agenda item, and we need to define the way to proceed. There's a number of interventions recognizing the importance of this gap analysis as a first step, and there were some recommendations, some suggestions for the recommendations. I don't believe we need to establish a contact group on this. I will ask the Secretariat to take a look on the different comments and based on this to prepare a CRP. Otherwise, it's going to be too many contact groups and we still have more documents to revise that probably will require. So I hope, please be sure to in the next hour to send your submissions with clarity about where do you want to have some amendments on the recommendation in how to proceed in understanding that this is just the first step and the Secretariat will work to propose a way forward to continue the analysis to know what are the major gaps, what do we have already in the Convention, what can we find outside in order to support the implementation of the framework. So I asked the Secretariat to prepare a CRP and we will revise that later. Just give me 1 second in order to know how long we have. We can extend this session if we can also address the next agenda item. Just give me 1 second. Okay, in order to continue with our ambitious agenda, I propose to work for half an hour more to cover agenda item 3D. So hopefully we can finish or at least have important progress in order to allow my colleague Marina from Finland to chair tomorrow. The package is an ambitious package also of documents on IPBES assessments and IPCC. To do that all in the morning tomorrow. So let's move to agenda item 3D on plant conservation. Before I give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce this item, we will have a presentation from Ms. Maite Delmas, co-chair of the Global Partnership on Plant Conservation, who will speak to us about the set of complementary actions related to plant conservation to support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Ms. Delmas, are you around? Yes. We also had a side event during lunch on this matter. You have the floor. Microphone to Pont.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. C'est un honneur pour moi de vous donner un bref aperçu de la mise à jour de la stratégie mondiale pour la conservation des plantes, qui est présentée à cette réunion comme un ensemble de mesures complémentaires en appui au cadre mondial de la diversité biologique. Le Partenariat mondial pour la conservation des plantes remercie le secrétariat de la Convention pour son soutien dans le développement de ces mesures complémentaires. Et nous remercions...
I'm sorry, colleagues, please, would you maintain silence in order to listen to the presentation of our colleague on plant conservation? Thank you very much. Please continue. If you can get closer to the microphone, it would be better.
Okay. Nous remercions également les nombreuses parties et les membres du partenariat pour leurs contributions et leurs conseils précieux. La stratégie pour la conservation des plantes a été un catalyseur très efficace pour mobiliser et guider les communautés botaniques et les spécialistes de la conservation des plantes, en stimulant de nombreuses nouvelles actions au niveau mondial, régional et national. Elle a fourni un cadre clair, cohérent et flexible, permettant l'élaboration de réponses nationales à la stratégie des plantes dans toute une série de pays, y compris dans les pays riches en biodiversité. En élaborant cette stratégie, la COP a reconnu le rôle essentiel des plantes dans la résilience des écosystèmes, la fourniture de services écosystémiques, l'adaptation aux défis environnementaux, y compris le changement climatique, et l'atténuation de ces défis, ainsi que dans le bien-être de l'homme. Depuis 2002, des progrès substantiels ont été accomplis dans la réalisation des objectifs, et ces progrès ont été bien décrits dans les rapports pour la conservation des plantes publiés en 2009 et 2020 et mis en évidence lors de la 5e édition des perspectives mondiales pour la diversité biologique. Au cours des 2 dernières décennies, la stratégie des plantes a été soutenue par le Partenariat mondial pour la conservation des plantes, qui a été créé en 2004 lors de la COP 7, dans le cadre d'une décision qui prévoyait également la mise en place d'un mécanisme de coordination souple. Son secrétariat est assuré par Botanic Garden Conservation International. Aujourd'hui, il comprend plus de 70 institutions et organisations dans le monde qui soutiennent les parties dans la réalisation de la SMCP. Des points focaux nationaux pour la stratégie complètent également ce dispositif. La dernière conférence du partenariat s'est tenue à l'initiative de l'Institut national sud-africain de la biodiversité, où un groupe de liaison de la stratégie s'est réuni pour examiner les progrès accomplis et envisager l'avenir de la SMCP. L'élaboration d'une mise à jour post-2020 a été proposée et a été appuyée par plusieurs parties, notamment lors de réunions informelles de l'OSAST 24 et lors de conférences et consultations internationales qui se sont tenues en Chine, notamment en 2018 et 2019. L'OSAST 24 a recommandé que cette mise à jour prenne la forme d'une série de mesures complémentaires en appui à la mise en œuvre du cadre mondial pour la biodiversité. Et la COP a invité le partenariat, avec le soutien du secrétariat, à préparer un ensemble de mesures complémentaires liées à la conservation des plantes. Ces 35 mesures que nous proposons liées à la conservation des plantes sont alignées sur les objectifs du cadre mondial. Chacune de ces mesures sera mise en œuvre en tenant compte des dispositifs de la CDB relatifs à l'accès juste et équitable et au partage des avantages, ainsi qu'à l'égalité des sexes. Les mesures visant à réduire les menaces pour la biodiversité couvrent la conservation et la restauration des écosystèmes, des espèces et de la diversité génétique. L'utilisation de la diversité des espèces végétales dans l'aménagement des territoires, l'utilisation des espèces indigènes dans les zones plantées pour le stockage du carbone et dans l'atténuation du changement climatique et l'adaptation à celui-ci. Elles comprennent aussi des mesures visant à assurer des niveaux de récolte et de commerce soutenables, ainsi que la surveillance et le contrôle des espèces végétales exotiques envahissantes. Les mesures proposées pour satisfaire les besoins des populations grâce à l'utilisation durable se réfèrent à l'amélioration des moyens de subsistance par la conservation et la gestion des plantes sauvages d'importance socio-économique et de leurs écosystèmes. Des initiatives visant à soutenir des efforts des communautés autochtones et locales pour conserver les connaissances, les innovations et les pratiques traditionnelles en matière de conservation et d'utilisation durable de la diversité végétale, en soutenant l'utilisation coutumière et culturelle de ces ressources. Le développement d'espaces verts accessibles, riches en biodiversité dans les zones urbaines, avec des programmes de verdissement urbain, de conservation de la biodiversité et de jardinage communautaire. Enfin, l'utilisation de la diversité végétale pour soutenir la nutrition, la santé, les moyens de subsistance et le bien-être. Concernant les outils et solutions en matière de mise en œuvre et d'intégration, il est proposé le développement, la diffusion et l'accès dans tous les pays d'évaluations mondiales et nationales exhaustives et faisant autorité sur les flores et le statut des espèces végétales connues et de leurs habitats naturels, de systèmes d'information en ligne et de l'accès à la documentation et aux inventaires ainsi qu'aux collections biologiques, notamment par le biais de la numérisation. Le développement d'initiatives de renforcement des capacités individuelles et institutionnelles, de ressources, de mise en réseau et d'engagement du public pour soutenir la conservation des plantes. Pour accompagner ces mesures complémentaires, un document d'information a été préparé et fourni pour cette réunion, présentant les justifications techniques de chacune des mesures complémentaires, ainsi que certains moyens possibles de mesurer les progrès accomplis. L'ensemble des mesures est basé sur les priorités et les actions de conservation de la diversité végétale qui ont été identifiées lors des différentes réunions internationales et des consultations des parties prenantes mentionnées. Elles découlent également des expériences, des priorités identifiées, des leçons tirées lors de la mise en œuvre des phases précédentes de la stratégie par les communautés botaniques et de la conservation des plantes. Elles seront régulièrement mises à jour. Les mesures reconnaissent l'importance des espèces végétales, leur rôle en tant qu'élément biologique et structurel des écosystèmes et leur importance socio-économique. Le Partenariat mondial pour la conservation des plantes et ses membres sont heureux de réitérer leur soutien à la mise à jour de la stratégie mondiale pour la conservation des plantes et appellent les parties à soutenir le projet de recommandation soumis à cette réunion. Nous nous réjouissons de pouvoir continuer à soutenir les parties dans la mise en œuvre de mesures de conservation des plantes dans les années à venir. Je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Delmas, for this presentation. Now I invite the Secretariat to take the floor to introduce item 3D.
Thank you, Chair. For item 3D, the Secretariat, with major inputs from the Global Partnership on Plant Conservation, as just described, prepared document Substar/25/5, which contains a set of complementary actions related to plant conservation to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. The document was prepared pursuant to decisions 15.5 and 15.13. The subsidiary body is invited to consider the draft recommendations provided in the document. In addition, the subsidiary body also has before it information document Substa/25/Inf4, which contains information on technical rationales for each of the proposed complementary actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have the document with the concrete set of complementary actions. So I open the floor on your views on item 3D. Let's start with Canada, followed by Spain and Indonesia.
Thank you, Chair. Canada appreciates the work of the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens Conservation International in preparing the proposed set of complementary actions to support implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. We note that COP15 requested that a set of complementary actions related to plant conservation be developed to support implementation of the KMGBF for consideration by Substa. Canada can support these actions provided they are voluntary in nature and do not impose any additional reporting or accountability obligations for parties. The focus of national reporting should be on the KMGBF, and inclusion of any complementary actions in national reports should be done on a voluntary basis. Canada suggests the addition of the term voluntary in the title of the annex and in various paragraphs of the draft decision, which we will submit in writing. Canada will propose some changes to various paragraphs in the annex to align with terminology used in the CBD, IPBES, and the KMGBF. Paras 6A and 6B of the annex should align with the language used in IPBES and in Target 6 of the KMGBF related to the management and eradication of invasive alien species. Canada will also propose changes to paragraph 11 to ensure that it is referring to increasing the sustainable management of existing areas under key productive sectors use, noting that increasing sustainably managed land is not necessarily better for biodiversity than leaving areas unmanaged. Canada further suggests that the references to Indigenous and local knowledge be replaced with traditional knowledge to align with language used in Article 8J of the Convention. We will submit our changes in writing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Canada. Please submit this in writing, and thank you for highlighting that these are voluntary actions, complementary actions to that can also facilitate the adoption, and also to remind that this annex with the complementary actions also passed through a peer review process. So it's been revised. So we are not departing from zero for taking into account in your interventions. Now I'll give the floor to España, followed by Indonesia and Sweden.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente, y muchas gracias al Partenariado Global de Conservación Vegetal por el trabajo realizado y por la presentación hecha. España reconoce la relevancia de la estrategia global para la conservación vegetal, por lo que acogemos con satisfacción y valoramos positivamente la actualización de acciones complementarias para el periodo posterior a 2020. No obstante, nos gustaría aclarar y concretar algunas de las acciones. A nivel nacional, los informes de objetivos nacionales deberían incluir los progresos obtenidos en la consecución de este conjunto de acciones complementarias. En este sentido, sería de ayuda proporcionar indicaciones para realizar el seguimiento de dichas acciones, utilizando el marco de seguimiento del Marco Mundial de la Biodiversidad. La conservación de la diversidad genética debería incluir una mención explícita a los cultivos, sus parientes silvestres y otras especies con valor socioeconómico en la conservación in situ y ex situ, en la acción 4D. Respecto a las especies silvestres, es necesario identificar cuáles son los niveles de cosecha sostenible, en la acción 5A, e incluir también las especies que probablemente puedan estar amenazadas en un futuro, en la acción 5B. Las estrategias y programas destinados a mejorar la biodiversidad, los servicios de los ecosistemas y la conectividad en las ciudades deben incentivar el uso de especies nativas resilientes al clima. También en las intervenciones en espacios azules como ríos y humedales urbanos, en la acción 12. Es importante incluir diferentes sistemas de conocimiento, innovaciones, prácticas y tecnologías tradicionales para la conservación de plantas en la acción 19, reconociendo el papel de las mujeres como poseedoras de conocimientos esenciales para la conservación vegetal en la acción 21. Hemos hecho llegar nuestras propuestas detalladas por escrito. Muchas gracias, presidente.
Muchas gracias, España. Now I give the floor to Indonesia, followed by Sweden and the UK.
Okay, thank you. Indonesian comment and welcome the work of the GSPC in preparing a set of complementary action related to the implementation of KMGPF. However, it is worth noting that the 20,000 GSPC Plan Conservation report show that several quantitative targets were not achieved. Therefore, Indonesia sees the need to reassess and consider the GSPC target adopted by the KMGPF, particularly on their feasibility. Regarding the strategy for land conservation in the annex document SBSTTA-15/5 on target 4, we are hoping that collection and conservation of plant genome that are also covered within the terminology of conservation of plant genetic diversity. We consider these to be crucial as safeguard in case of the loss of physical specimen of plant species or extinction. We are suggest that seed bank and germ place collection also be included within the coverage. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Terima kasih, Indonesia. Now we'll give the floor to Sweden, followed by UK and Colombia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sweden welcomes a set of complementary actions related to plant conservation to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Sweden is of the view that the global strategy for plant conservation is still relevant and well established among relevant actors. The strategy should not be replaced by a set of complementary actions, and therefore it is proposed to not refer to an update of the strategy only, but always to a set of complementary actions as an update to the strategy. Sweden has only a few proposals for text amendments in the recommendation and in the set of complementary actions. We are, for example, of the view that the level of ambition could be increased in the actions 1 and 4b, that the role of genetic diversity can be strengthened across the set of actions, that wording regarding monitoring need to be adjusted, and that the language regarding invasive alien species in actions 6 and 8, as well as regarding the use of climate-resilient species in actions 11 and 12, can be improved. Further, we support a new action under Action 15 on the provision of information to promote sustainable consumption practices in plant use. We will provide concrete text proposals in an annex to the statement and would like to underline that it is our ambition to support a recommendation to COP16 for the adoption of the set of complementary actions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sudhi. I'll give the floor to UK, followed by Colombia and Germany.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The UK would like to thank the Global Partnership for Plant Conservation and the Secretariat for producing the set of complementary actions related to plant conservation to support the implementation of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Plants are the basis of all life on Earth and the building blocks of our ecosystems. Therefore, the conservation of plants is essential if we are to halt and reverse biodiversity loss and meet the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. Previous frameworks to focus action on plants have been helpful to advance and promote plant conservation measures. Like Canada, we support these complementary actions as a voluntary and flexible framework which can help guide parties regarding the specific actions they may want to take in relation to plants when implementing the Global Biodiversity Framework. Given the importance of plant conservation for biodiversity, and also noting the voluntary nature of these actions, we can support the set of complementary actions as drafted in the annex to document 25/5. We suggest that we do not have the time to negotiate line by line these complementary actions in the same way we did negotiate the goals and targets of the Global Biodiversity Framework. However, if the annex is to be open for discussion, we will be ready to engage and will propose amendments to help clarify some of these actions and better align them with the Global Biodiversity Framework. With regards to the draft decision itself, like Sweden, we suggest that it should be clarified that parties are agreeing a set of voluntary complementary actions for plants and not adopting an updated global plant strategy for conservation. We also suggest highlighting in the draft decision that these actions, where applicable, should cover inland waters and marine environments as well, and not just terrestrial plants. We have submitted our proposed amendments in writing. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, UK, and thank you for those precisions. Now I'll give the floor to Colombia, followed by Germany.
Gracias, señor presidente. En representación de Colombia quisiera presentar las siguientes consideraciones. Primero, respecto a la propuesta de acciones complementarias relacionadas con la conservación de las especies vegetales, es importante indicar que Colombia ha publicado toda la información disponible sobre especies invasoras de flora y hemos realizado las alianzas internacionales para que la información de Colombia sea útil y visible a nivel global. En Colombia hemos trabajado la estrategia de conservación de especies vegetales que se ha realizado de manera articulada a nivel local con los pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales, entendidas en Colombia como pueblos indígenas, negros, palenqueros, raizales y rom, así como campesinos y otras comunidades locales. En la Amazonía, estas publicaciones remarcan un trabajo conjunto con los gobiernos locales, acorde con las necesidades de los pueblos indígenas y las comunidades locales, especialmente las comunidades campesinas que habitan la región. Igualmente queremos informar que Colombia se encuentra en proceso de actualización del Plan Nacional para la Prevención, Control y Manejo de las Especies Introducidas, Trasplantadas e Invasoras, instrumento orientador de la gestión de las especies exóticas invasoras a nivel nacional. En el marco de este proceso se ha hecho evidente la necesidad de apoyo para el fortalecimiento de capacidades técnicas y financieras, tanto de las instituciones a nivel nacional como regional y local, y su articulación a nivel sectorial e interinstitucional en los siguientes aspectos: metodologías de análisis de costo-beneficio y costo-efectividad, identificación y minimización de riesgos adicionales asociados con el comercio electrónico transfronterizo de organismos vivos y sus efectos, la gestión de especies exóticas invasoras en lo que se refiere a la prevención de posibles riesgos derivados del cambio climático y otros cambios mundiales, análisis de riesgos de las posibles consecuencias de la introducción de especies exóticas invasoras en los valores socioeconómicos y culturales, pertinencia de las bases de datos para apoyar la gestión de especies exóticas invasoras. De otro lado, Colombia quiere resaltar que los procesos urgentes que debemos adelantar para la restauración de los ecosistemas requieren de acciones complementarias para la conservación de las especies vegetales con el objetivo de detener la pérdida actual y continua de la diversidad vegetal. Esto contribuirá a la implementación del marco global de biodiversidad, con base también en las experiencias exitosas en la aplicación de la Estrategia Mundial para la Conservación de las Especies Vegetales. Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Muchas gracias, Colombia. Recordemos que les he pedido que nos enfoquemos a los cambios concretos, a las recomendaciones y a los anexos. Estamos llegando, son Nos quedan 2 minutos, entonces daré la palabra a Alemania y después a la Secretaría por si tienen anuncios antes de que cerremos la sesión de esta tarde. Alemania tiene la palabra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We recognize that plants, as primary producers, play a central role in the Earth ecosystems. They form the largest part of the biomass, they shape terrestrial landscapes and habitats, and at the same time, they are the basis of human life and well-being. We therefore cannot ignore the fact that plant life is under serious threat and that considerable efforts must be made to halt the loss of plant species and diversity. Germany likes to underline the great importance of the GSPC as a driving force and supporting tool for plant conservation over the past 2 decades. We now fully support to integrate the update of the GSPC within the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. We are convinced that the complementary actions are necessary and suitable to provide new impetus and opportunities for achieving the GBF goals in terms of plant conservation, sustainable use, and fair benefit sharing in the post-2020 period, even in the face of global change. We affirm that plant conservation, as well as climate mitigation and adaptation, require harmonized approaches. We strongly appreciate that the priority use of native species in response to the challenges of ecological restoration and climate mitigation is clearly expressed in the update. We also appreciate that the conservation of the genetic diversity of species should also be ensured through in situ and ex situ programs. We will hand in some comments in writing. Thank you.
Dankeschön, Germany. So, with this, we finish interventions for this afternoon night session. We still have a long list of speakers. I will name them to continue when we recommend on this topic. Is Switzerland, Japan, Mexico, EU, Brazil, Argentina, Belgium, Costa Rica, Kenya on behalf of Africa. Then I will move it before. South Africa and Uganda. So far is the list, so we will continue in the next session. I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat if there are any message before closing.
Thank you, Chair. Tonight was originally scheduled for the reception of Substar and also for the 20 years anniversary for the Cartagena Protocol. But with the desire that we want to have a more combined reception with also COP, the reception is postponed now to the evening of 19 October on Thursday. So we'll inform again the venue and more specific timing later. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretariat. And with this, we finish our deliberations for today. And I thank the interpreters for the extension for half an hour more than we originally scheduled. And with this, the meeting is adjourned.